Good afternoon and welcome to the October 7th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. We'll call the meeting to order at 1:00 p.m. And I'll welcome my colleagues to come on screen. And Ms. Fennessy, if we could do a roll call, please.
Thank you. I'll now start the roll call. Vice Chair Escobedo.
Here.
Commissioner Bonderson.
Here.
Commissioner Higgins.
Here.
Commissioner Lodge.
Here.
Commissioner Reed.
Here.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Here.
And I understand Chair Schwartz is going to be a little late. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. As Ms. Fennessy said, Chair Schwartz will be here in about 30 to 45 minutes, and at that time, she'll take over the meeting. But until then, I'll be running today's meeting. And so we will move on to preliminary matters, and we will start with Ms. DeBusk. Are there any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items?
Thank you, Vice Chair Escobedo. We have none.
Thank you. And we'll move on to announcements and appeals. And it's my understanding that we have Eli Isaacson here, the new Community Development Director. It's good to see you, Mr. Isaacson. And I understand you want to introduce yourself, so I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Gabriel. I just wanted to jump on quickly and say hi and introduce myself to those of you I haven't had a chance to meet yet. I've had a chance to meet with Roxana through her work on the SSAC, and I met with Leslie earlier this week to talk about some waterfront issues. But it's nice to see the rest of you. As you know, I've been in this role since late July. I think July 26th was my first day. So I've been here just over 2 months, slowly getting out there and trying to meet with more and more people in the community. So hopefully I'll get a chance to meet with some of you one-on-one here soon. But I just want to let everyone know how excited I am to be in this role as the Community Development Director for the City of Santa Barbara. And I'm really looking forward to doing good things with the team we have here. It's a really impressive team of people, and I've really enjoyed getting to know them and getting an opportunity to work with them over these past few months, and look forward to what we're able to do together moving forward. So with that, I just wanted to say hi and talk to all of you soon.
Thank you, and it's nice meeting you.
Great.
Look forward to talking to you soon.
Excellent. Take care.
You too. Ms. DeBusk, are there any other announcements or appeals?
Vice Chair Escobedo, there are none.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to C, which is review and consideration and action on the following draft commission minutes for September 9th, 2021. And I'll ask my fellow commissioners, are there any edits that you'd like to make to the meeting minutes? And if not, is there a motion to approve?
No, I'll move to approve, Mr. Chair.
And a second. So a motion from Commissioner Wiscombe, a second from Commissioner Bonderson. Any discussion? Guessing not, and not seeing any. Ms. Fennessy, if we could do a roll call vote, please.
Thank you, and I'll start the roll call vote. Commissioner Bonderson.
Yes.
Commissioner Higgins.
Yes.
Commissioner Lodge.
Yes.
Commissioner Reed.
Yes.
Commissioner Wiscombe.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Escobedo.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. And now we will move on to public comment for items that are not on today's agenda. Mr. Buss, do we have anyone from the public that would like to give public comment?
Thank you, Vice Chair Escobedo. For anyone that has joined us by webinar, if you would like to make a public comment on items that are not on today's agenda, please click the raise lower hand icon on the control panel, and each speaker will have 2 minutes. It looks like we have one public speaker today. Lonnie Roy, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, honorable commissioners. My name is Lonnie Roy. I work with Mr. Ed St. George, who asked me to read a letter on his behalf as he was unable to make this hearing. He would like to address the commissioners regarding the 801 Cliff Drive Habitat Restoration Status Report, which was heard by the commission on September 2nd. I will now read his letter. During the recent Planning Commission meeting held on September 2nd, 2021, I was en route to Santa Barbara. While the item resolution was a positive outcome, my office failed to mention to me the specifics of the City Planning Department's presentation until a week later during our monthly update meeting. To say the least, I was quite upset when I watched the recorded meeting, and reason being, I feel the City Planning Department grossly understated my level of involvement and commitment to the native habitat restoration at Beach City. My team has and continues to work closely with our biologist, Larry Hunt, so I called him to get his personal opinion on the success of the restoration. I have included a well-described letter of Larry Hunt's assessment of our work so far, which is included as written public comment 7. In addition, I would also like to include some information not included in his report, such as the amazing return of native wildlife due to the return of native plant life. We are happy to report for the first time I have owned this property, we now have a family of red-tailed hawks, a family of skunks, raccoons, squirrels, and hundreds of songbirds. As Mr. Hunt pointed out, this has not been an easy restoration given its natural challenges, and not to mention the constant barrage of homeless encampments that literally spring up overnight. I personally view the Planning Commission as the adults in the room in our city's process, and therefore feel it important out of respect for your commitment to let you know I take very seriously your recommendations and my responsibilities to follow as such. Thank you again for your volunteer time. With much regards, Ed St. George. Thank you, Commissioners.
Mr. Roy. Mr. Busk, are there any other public commenters?
Thank you. I do not see anyone else with their hand raised, and so I will ask Ms. Fennessy if we received any written correspondence.
Thank you, Mr. Busk. We received 9 general public comments that were distributed to the Commission prior to this meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Fennessy. So with that, we will move on to today's only item, which is item 3, the discussion item, and it's the multi-unit housing economic feasibility analysis and related draft floor to lot area ratio map. And we have Ms. Metzger here to present with us, and I believe after that we'll also have we will have Aaron Barker from BAE, the consultant that worked on the feasibility analysis.
Yes, thank you, Chair Escobedo, and good afternoon, Planning Commission. We can start with the next slide, please, Mr. Bolton. So the purpose of our hearing today is to receive from the Planning Commission or get from the consultant a presentation on the economic feasibility analysis, to consider the findings and the recommendations of the study, and to review and comment on the floor to lot area ratio map. Next slide. Just to give you some background on this, we received direction from City Council in 2020 to change from regulating multi-unit housing or apartments and condominiums by density to limiting the number of units per lot by building size using floor to lot area ratio. Next slide, please. To give you a background on the working definition that we have for FAR, the total enclosed area of all floors below the roof within the exterior walls of the building or the enclosed structure. This definition does not include the basement or any underground parking. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you just a quick background on what FAR looks like in a model from SketchUp that an architect locally made for us. So this is a standard lot that we would have in the downtown area on State Street. So this building is 2 stories and represents an FAR of 1.6. Next slide, please. And then when you go up to 3 stories, the FAR continues to grow to 2.3 FAR. Also in this model, we did commercial on the ground floor, which is constant with what we see on State Street. Next slide, please. And then as you reach 4 stories, you get to an FAR of 3, which is the largest FAR on our draft building size map that was included in your packet and reviewed by BAE for the study today. And this building has been designed within the parameters of the existing height restrictions of 48 feet in the downtown. You'll also notice that the building is articulated in the front for the first 3 stories of residential. That would be something standard per building code to provide for light and air, possibly balconies in that area. Next slide, please. And then finally, the last example that we have of FAR for this downtown building would be 5 stories and an FAR of 3.6. So this would be a building that would come in through the process of community benefit, asking for additional height above the standard 48 feet in the downtown. Next slide, please. So to give you some real world examples in Santa Barbara, these are the FARs of some buildings that have been built recently in Santa Barbara. So Gardens on Hope is a housing authority project for low-income seniors. That comes into an FAR of 0.7. Arlington Village by the Public Market is an FAR of 0.9. One of our newest projects that was completed in 2020 is 835 East Canyon Perdido, or the Riviera project. That comes in at an FAR of 1.3. One of our first projects created under the AUD program was 604 East Coda, and that has an FAR of 1.5. And then one of the other projects that was completed in 2020 is 214 East De La Guerra, coming in at an FAR of 2. And then one of the older condominium projects created outside of the AUD program is Paseo Chapala, which also comes in at a 0.2. And so now I would like to go to the next slide and introduce our consultants from BAE and JKA. And so we will have the presentation from this point forward being given by Aaron Barker. He's assisted on his team with Stephanie Hager. And then our consultant of the team from JKA is John Kolaski. And I'll just let Aaron take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. And thank you, commissioners, for having me this afternoon. My name is Aaron Barker. I'm a vice president with BAE Urban Economics. As Jessica mentioned, joined here by my colleagues, Stephanie Hagar, as well as John Koliski, who is with JKA Architects. Next slide, please. So for the presentation overview, in terms of what we're going to cover today, I would like to take you through a high-level summary of each aspect of the study completed. This includes a brief recap of the practitioner interviews, which we spoke about at a previous meeting. We'll also include a discussion of how we went about formulating our residential prototypes, as well as findings from the feasibility analysis and subsequent recommendations. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the scope of work and where we are to date, the previous items I mentioned have been submitted. That includes the residential prototypes, the feasibility analysis, and the study. And we're here to support the hearing process at this point. Next slide, please. So just a very brief recap of our practitioner interviews. We conducted a series of interviews in July and August of 2021. The sort of narrow scope was intended to inform the development of our residential prototypes based on existing development standards in the proposed FAR map. We were aiming to get feedback on sort of prevailing local market standard for parking ratios, bedroom distribution, and sort of a minimum lot size that would be required for a project to be feasible. And we also looked to the interviews to provide or inform cost inputs for feasibility analysis, such as hard and soft costs, required rates of return, cap rates, and other factors. Next slide, please. So the residential prototypes were developed by JKA. The prototypes are intended to represent a range of zones on the draft FAR map, which I believe you've all had a chance to review. And these prototypes follow the same development standards that exist currently under the AUD program. This includes height, open space requirements, side yards and setbacks, parking standards, etc. And it's also important to keep in mind that these are what we call volumetric boxes used to calculate FAR that were developed by JKA. These are not intended to be sort of complete architectural renderings that would go through a formal building process, but rather sort of high-level concepts. Next slide, please. So in terms of the process for going about prototype development, this slide sort of orients everyone back towards the draft FAR map. Our prototypes are currently located in FAR zones 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. These represent sort of the brackets of high and low being considered by the city currently. But we were also able to extrapolate the 1.5 zones into 2.5 zones by scaling up and downward the bonus tiers, which we'll get into in the next slide. So for the prototype tiers, each FAR zone within the draft FAR map would include 3 tiers of development rights. For the condo tier, you'd be eligible for 80% of the maximum FAR shown in the map, and 15% of units would be affordable to middle-income households. For the tier 2 on the draft FAR map, you would be eligible for 100% for the full FAR that is displayed associated with that parcel, with a 10% requirement towards moderate income households. And for the tier 3, we would see up to 20% FAR bonus above the tier 2. And we tested for a range here, 15 to 20% of units affordable to moderate income households. So just for some context, let's say you were in FAR zone 2.0, your eligible FAR for a condominium would be 1.6. You'd have the full 2.0 FAR in tier 2, and you'd be eligible for up to 2.4 FAR in the tier 3 scenario. Next slide, please. So I know that these are, this probably kind of small font, but we invite everyone to follow along. You can also reference the staff report. I believe that these begin, that we're going to go through FAR 2, and this begins on page 50, I believe. So just to sort of take you through the process, for lot size, which is sort of our starting point, we, specifically JKA, reviewed the AUD permit database, as well as standard lot configurations within the city to get at 2 lot sizes for comparison. What we're calling small lots are characterized by dimensions of 100 by 100 feet, and that is meant to kind of represent a typical consolidated parcel of 2 single-family lots. That equates to a parcel size of 10,000 square feet or 0.23 acres. And on the other end of the spectrum, our large lots, or what we're calling large lots, are 130 feet by 200 feet deep, equating to a parcel size of about 26,000 square feet or 0.6 acres. So in this very specific case, we are looking at a condominium project in FAR zone 2.0. According to the draft FAR map, this would be in an R-NH zone, typically found on the east side and west side. In this condominium example, we are at an FAR of 1.58, which is approximately 80% of that allowable 2.0 FAR. We have a height of 44 feet, which complies with the existing development standards. We have a 27-unit project. 4 units are set aside for middle-income households. We have an average unit size here of 1,038 square feet, which is larger than the unit size that we're going to be modeling for the rentals. And we see an effective density of 45 dwelling units per acre in this example. Next slide. So in our tier 2 rental example, we're at a 1.91 FAR, which is just shy of that 2.0 maximum. We're still at a height of 44 feet. We've got 44 units with 5 units set aside for moderate income households. That's at that 10% rate, inclusionary rate. Average unit size of 782 square feet, which is smaller than what we were modeling for the condos. And we have an effective density of 73 dwelling units per acre. So I think here is kind of where you're starting to see the potential for this FAR program to meet some of council's direction, which is to facilitate smaller housing units by removing that density limit that is currently at 63. So we're at about 74 here. And next slide. So finally, this is our tier 3 rental example. We're at a 2.34 FAR, which is just shy of our 20% bonus above the tier 2. We're at a height of 45 feet. 9 units are going to be set aside for moderate income households. If 15% affordability is required, we'd get 11 units set aside for moderate income households if there is a 20% requirement. Average unit size is similar, about 782 square feet. And we have an effective density here of 92 dwelling units per acre. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of the feasibility analysis, to calculate financial feasibility for each of these prototypes, we used static pro forma models that were structured to calculate the residual land value associated with each prototype. And we're defining residual land value as equal to the market value of the project at stabilization minus total development costs and developer profit. And total development costs here include hard costs, which is costs associated with the actual building, as well as soft costs, which represent permitting, architecture and engineering, hold-in costs, financing. And the result is our residual land value, which is the price that theoretically one could afford to pay for a given development site. Next slide. So in terms of the thresholds that we're using to define feasibility, we're saying a 10% return on cost, which is sort of at the higher end of what we heard from our practitioner interviews. We don't want to overestimate feasibility. We took the residual land value approach in part because there aren't a lot of land comparables in the city. So rather than trying to sort of shoehorn a set land value in for each prototype, this allows us to accommodate some variability. And projects with marginal feasibility, for example, that don't quite meet that threshold might tip into feasibility if, say, a property owner were to accept a lower price for the land, or there could be an alternate arrangement such as a ground lease, for example, or the developer could accept a slightly lower return on cost. So there's quite a few ways to get a marginally feasible project to feasible. Next slide. Okay, so some of our high-level findings. Most of the rental prototypes that we analyzed were either feasible or marginally feasible. Projects that were on smaller lots, we found, again, that was that 10,000 square foot size, tended to face more challenges in achieving financial feasibility. For example, the findings show that on small sites in FAR zone 3.0, feasibility at 10% inclusionary is likely infeasible, but it would be marginally feasible if we were modeling that same prototype on the larger 26,000 square foot site. So just an example there. Another finding was that the current in lieu fee rates are likely to incentivize developers to keep projects at 10 or fewer units. Sort of an example of this would be if you're in, for example, FAR zone 1.0, on a small lot and you're eligible to build 7 units, for example. And under tier 2, you would pay an in lieu fee at $25 a square foot. It's unlikely that you would opt into tier 3, which would put you at 10 units, and you'd therefore be responsible for including an on-site affordable unit. So it's important to sort of keep in mind those tipping points with the smaller projects as you approach that 10-unit threshold. Next slide. So in terms of the feasibility findings for the condo specifically, one finding was that on the small, low FAR sites where you were able to pay that in lieu fee that I alluded to earlier, the proposed FAR thresholds could incentivize condos over rental units in some cases, and that the condominium in lieu fee is certainly lower than the cost of providing that additional affordable unit. Next slide. For tier 2, rental projects were either feasible or marginally feasible, assuming that 10% inclusionary requirement. Feasibility was most likely in the FAR zones 1.0 and 2.0. And I think, as we mentioned earlier, it was most challenging on those smaller sites in FAR zone 3.0. Next slide. And so for the tier 3 feasibility findings, with a 15% affordability requirement, we found that a 20% FAR bonus was generally sufficient to achieve financial feasibility. If the city opts to go the 20% route, that 20% FAR bonus may not be sufficient in all cases. Next slide. Okay. So in terms of recommendations, we have a few to sort of consider. We would say that streamlining the development review process would go quite a ways. We heard that there can be quite a bit of uncertainty during the approvals process, in addition to multi-year hearing timelines. So anything that could be done to inject a bit more certainty into the process would certainly enhance feasibility. The second recommendation to consider additional development standard incentives. To reiterate, our prototypes did not adjust existing AUD development standards. And as such, we sort of were very strictly holding to those heights and side yards and setbacks that we referenced earlier. If the city were to look at some of those a little more closely, there could be a chance that we could enhance feasibility in some cases. And the third bullet here would be to consider additional FAR incentives if the city does opt to go the route of a 20% inclusionary requirement for tier 3. Final slide. So in order to make sort of equitable the cost benefit analysis between opting for a smaller project where you didn't have to include an inclusionary unit versus paying an in lieu fee, raising the in lieu fee would make that a little bit more of an even decision. We would recommend continuing to allow for flexible parking requirements as you do currently inside the CBD, especially if you're opting for more affordability at the tier 3 level, and that you might also potentially consider reductions in parking requirements outside the CBD in very specific cases. Next slide. And I think that is what we have. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Barker. So, Chair Escobedo, in conclusion, I'd like to go to the next slide and just remind the Planning Commission and members of the public of how we got to where we are right now with this draft FAR building size map. So we started looking at those FAR numbers by reviewing our existing AUD map. In 2020, City Council made a direction to staff to have the biggest buildings in our city be located in our downtown core. And this was due to a variety of reasons, mostly being that this is the area where other large buildings exist in Santa Barbara. It has a very active transportation system in our downtown, so you're not necessarily needing cars. It has many open spaces that are available to the public and people that might be moving downtown. And also, it is prime for having more people living downtown to increase the vitality of the downtown in both commercial and activity on the street. And so the highest densities, as you'll see on this map, this is the existing AUD map, are the red areas with the crashed areas. So also including La Cumbra Plaza and Milpeth Street here. And then additionally, in last year, we worked with the AIA on their charrette, and we were able to have them pull what the FARs were for each of the buildings they proposed in the downtown area. And these buildings were developed within the existing standards for the AUD map, much like the prototypes that Mr. Barker showed earlier. And so we were able to see through the charrette work that if we moved from regulating by density to regulating by FAR, we would increase the number of units in our city. And then finally, we also looked at the existing AUD projects, both on the ground and in the pipeline, and what those FARs would be. So if you go to the next slide, please, Mr. Bolton. This is a map of all of the AUD projects with the dots representing the size of the FAR. And I think if you click through, Mr. Bolton, there's additional labels that will come on. There we go. And so the largest FAR that we have currently is the MARC, which is completed on Upper State Street at 2.7 FAR. Additionally, we have 634 Anacapa, which comes in at a 2.2 FAR built on the ground. And then we also have some in the pipeline, including 410 State Street, which comes in at a 2 FAR, and 825 De La Vina, which comes in at a 2.4. So we use these numbers to inform the numbers for our FAR map as well. Next slide, please. And so this is a map of our draft FARs with those dots for the AUD projects overlaid. Next slide, please. So for Planning Commission today, we really want to ask you these questions on the slide here. First and foremost, we want to ask you if you think, based on the analysis done by BAE, that the FAR map, the draft map, is correct, and the numbers and the metrics on it are what we should do to increase the housing supply in our city. We also would like you to weigh in on if 20% added FAR is acceptable for that tier 3. And then based on the analysis that you've reviewed, if 15% or 20% is affordable for inclusionary for tier 3. And then additionally, in the recommendations from BAE, we would like to look and see if you think increasing the in-lieu fee for smaller projects and condos would net us more of those affordable units also. And then also review the larger FARs for smaller lots to make those more feasible in our downtown. And then any additional input that you have on the development standards that could be incentivized for going forward with the multi-unit housing program. So with that, Chair Escobedo, I think we'll stop on this slide and take questions that we have from the public, from the commission.
Thank you, Ms. Metzger. I think what we'll do is go to public comment first and then return with questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Metzger. And Ms. DeBusk, while my colleagues come and join us. Are there public commenters that would like to make public comment on this item?
Yes, for members of the public that have joined by webinar, if you would like to make a public comment, please click the raise lower hand icon on the control panel, and I will notify you when it's your turn to speak. Each speaker will have 2 minutes, and a red arrow pointed down indicates that your hand is raised. At this time, we have 3 public speakers, and we may get more as we move on. I will start with Craig Minus, to be followed by Fred Sweeney. Craig Minus, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning, and Chair and members of the Planning Commission. First, I wanted to thank you for your continued study to help resolve our housing crisis in the city. I represent the property at 932 De La Vina Street. And I had submitted a letter on my letterhead, CAM Land Use and Development, a few months ago. And I recognize that this is a work in progress on your end, on staff's end. It's also a work in progress on the applicant's end. So we're, I think, jointly working to comprehend these recommendations. I just had a comment that was, maybe preliminary, but that property specifically under the AUD program could achieve kind of the highest densities. So I guess it was kind of a premier site, given that it was in the high density tier, the priority housing overlay tier, and the central business district. If I look at the new FAR map, it's not in the highest tier. And I was just wondering if there is a reason for that, if that should be re-looked at. Again, this is I think a very viable site. It's an underdeveloped site. It is on the city's, major corridor of Carrillo. And moreover, the FAR map does have adjacent properties that are in the 3.0 FAR zone. So it just didn't look like there was a, direct methodology, and it was inconsistent with how the property was treated under the AUD program. So I'd like that to be reviewed or maybe re-looked at, and there might be a good answer for that. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minus. Mr. Busk, who we have next?
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Fred Sweeney, to be followed by Steve Johnson. Fred Sweeney, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioners. I've sent you a letter with some images which you all have seen before, and maybe pictures are worth 1,000 words. I would urge you in this process to have staff to be more robust about neighborhood compatibility issues and the edge conditions. The consultant's diagram a few minutes ago really doesn't show the impact that these buildings will have on adjacent residential neighborhoods, specifically those on Upper State. And Ms. Lodge may be able to help me on this. Outer State is from basically Mission Creek out to the freeway. Upper State is from Mitchell-Trina to Constance. And I wish people would fall in line on the nomenclature. And so Upper State is going to be impacted heavily by 4 and 5 story buildings between Arriaga Street and Mission Street. And I don't believe that the neighborhood now is really becoming aware of what's going to happen should these projects move forward, and the developer buying lots and combining them to make it more advantageous to build larger units. And I think that's a misstep on the consultant's review of who's going to build these things. So a much more robust issue. Also, we know we have a neighborhood preservation ordinance that's going to need to get revisited because Senate Bill 9 and 10, along with solar access, the solar access ordinance. So I think that staff needs to be much more robust in making sure that language is included. And any ordinance covering these AUDs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney.
And our next speaker is Steve Johnson. Steve Johnson, you have 2 minutes.
Microphone. Thank you. Quickly want to review the results of the AUD program from 2015 to 2020. From the city's website, there were 4 moderate units created and 1,121 above moderate units. So I think the numbers speak for themselves. That program was not a success. With similar results in 2025, the state of California could fine the city $50 million. That's not opinion. That's Senate Bill 330 and a little bit of arithmetic. Projects with 15% or even inclusionary or even 20% inclusionary units are worse than no project at all. That's not an opinion. Again, that's just arithmetic. To meet RENA goals, projects must create affordable units at a 50% rate. So you've got to aim high. You can't accept 20%. The only feasible way to get such projects, everybody understands, you have to have expensive units to subsidize the restricted units. And the only way to get there is going to be a hybrid. Projects that are 50% market rate condos and 50% restricted rate rentals. There's no reason why you can't create a zoning that allows that configuration. I'm going to close quickly with a comment about administration of inclusionary units. It's a complex process best left to experts. All 17 jurisdictions in the county of San Mateo use experts. The city wants to have property owners do the administration. Don't be surprised if the results are calamitous. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And I see Chair Schwartz is online, and so now would be an appropriate time for me to turn it over to Chair Schwartz.
Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone's patience. As you know, I was at a candidate forum and they just let us out. So appreciate being back with you. We continuing on, Ms. DeBusk, with public comment?
Yes, thank you, Chair Schwartz. It appears that we have one final speaker. John Campanella, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Just one comment, if I can, on the AUD projects that were shown on the map. The 2 to 2.5 FAR is due primarily to the fact that livable area was restricted to 1.0 approximately. That's under the AUD program. So about 40% of the building that's built, actually people are living in. The rest is circulation, commercial, and parking, which is a reason it's expensive and as we move forward because of cost would be prohibitive unless we started increasing FARs that would also increase livable area. And I think that's the goal of what's going on here. So we shouldn't compare ourselves to the past, but look forward to the future. I sent a letter in which showed 1.5 FAR is very widely dispersed throughout the community, both in multifamily areas, but also in commercial, which is going to require, in most cases, mixed use to be constructed along these commercial corridors. 1.5 was not financially analyzed, and it's important to do so rather than just interpolating. As you saw in the initial example illustration, 1.5 comes out to 2 floors. So how does one build commercial property, parking required outside the CBD, and have 1 floor left for housing? I would say that you really have to look at the areas where 1.5 is, and that has to be adjusted upward based upon the commercial cost and utilization of the properties. The other one is on Haley Coda and La Cumbra. It's a 2.0 FAR, which is under what's being produced under priority. What is the reason for reducing FARs in those 2 areas from what's currently being built? Thank you.
Thank you. And if anyone else would like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. I'm not currently seeing anyone, so I will turn it over to Ms. Fennessy regarding written correspondence.
Thank you. We received 13 written correspondence letters for item 3 that were distributed to the commission prior to this meeting.
Madam Chair, your audio is breaking up. Chair Schwartz is going to log off real quick and log back in. Ms. DeBus?
Yes, Vice Chair Escobedo, while we're waiting, I would like to let the public know that if they would like to be listed as an interested party, they can do so by either submitting an email request to the PC Secretary, by calling the PC Secretary at the number listed on the screen, or by sending a written request. And all of this information is on our agenda if anyone would like to look it up. Thank you.
Chair Schwartz, we still can't hear you. Nope. Ms. DeBus, do we want to maybe take a brief recess and try and help Chair Schwartz with her technology before we move on?
I think we can start with commissioner questions while we're trying to get Chair Schwartz's audio working.
Okay, that sounds great. So with that, we'll turn it back to the commission, and Commissioner Higgins, I think you were on first before we went to public comment. Did you want to kick off questions?
Yeah, sure. Is it Mr. Barker from the Economist? If I don't remember his last name.
Yes.
Great, I got it right. Thank you for the presentation and the study. I'm not an economist, so I may have missed some stuff here. I'm going to ask you some basic questions, and I look forward to rereading this prior to our next hearing. But in your prototypes, do you have any common area included in the density calculations, or is it really just straight simple? Because it looks like my hunch was the FAR looks low, but the density looks high. Is there any common area factored in, lobby space or community area, that kind of thing?
We do the FAR, and I can JKA can also weigh in on this as well. But the gross building area, which is what FAR is calculated on, does in fact include circulation.
But not like large lobby spaces or maybe amenities, gyms or something like that?
No, it would include that as well.
Okay, cool. Okay, walk me back through the different parameters that were required or needed for condos. Why do we have different treatment of condos versus apartments?
That was the direction that we received as part of the study. Looks like Jessica would like to weigh in as well.
Yes, so Vice Chair Escobedo and Commissioner Higgins. So when we first brought the idea of using FAR instead of density to Planning Commission and the City Council, we presented it with these 3 different tiers, one for condominiums, one for rental, and then the tier for rentals with additional affordable units above and beyond what inclusionary requires. And so we were just continuing with that direction of having those 3 tiers. But we're open to any comments on if that's appropriate or not.
Okay. So I'm reading this correctly, that the foundation of the analysis to provide more incentives or flexibility for rentals was part of the direction from city to you, Mr. Barker. Okay. Mr. Barker explicitly I want you to answer this question. What do you consider to be streamlining?
I would say that anything that reduces the number of hearings that an applicant would be required to participate in as part of a development that complies with existing guidelines.
Okay, so when you look in your pro formas, these are all, when you say use the word static, what's your assumption from point A to point B, point A being acquisition of the property, point B being, you know, certificate of occupancy in terms of timing?
This static pro formas per se don't account for the length of time that a permitting process might or might not take.
Okay.
I think that is a pretty, you know, variable. Sounds like there's quite a bit of variability with respect to that timeline in the city. But the main thing is that a longer timeline would certainly affect your carrying and your financing costs. So
okay, so see, these were all evaluated with a 0 time value of, you know, so there's no interest carry costs in the pro forma or whatever it is. It's all equal.
Well, what we do sort of up the required developer return threshold beyond what we sort of heard was a baseline. And I think that was something that we heard that practitioners that have a little bit more experience locally in the community tend to be able to move projects through faster. But that in cases where there's a project, even if it does comply with existing guidelines, that for whatever reason has more community involvement, that we sort of accommodated for that with our higher developer return threshold.
And then does your analysis include the costs that would, or the revenue that would need to be included in the whole project if there's an existing tenant or existing units on the ground? Or are these pro formas based on kind of nothing on the property? In other words, if I have to make something pencil, it's got to be juicier than a regular pro forma return. It's got to be that on top of what my existing income stream is. You understand my question?
Yes. So none of our comps were technically vacant sites. So none of our land comps were, you know, pure vacant sites that had been were ready for construction. So by definition, any of the comps that we utilized, there was a prior use that was presumably generating revenue, and so that was certainly included in the posted transaction price. So
and that income stream, is that buried somewhere in your pro forma sheets, or it's just an assumption?
Given the fact that none of our land comps were vacant, and so by definition they were all producing income, those are sort of baked in.
And they were all equally, that was a static assumption in all your different models, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Ms. Metzger.
Yes, Commissioner Hayden.
On the map, and I know this has probably been covered at some point, but just a question. The map excludes, and this is, you know, foundational on the AUD map too, it excludes government properties, like, for example, school district properties. Is that correct?
Yes, so the areas in the downtown that are white are from our general plan land use map as public facilities. So it could be parks, it could be government facilities, could be the school district building, but those do not allow multi-unit housing. And so that is why they're not included in this map. You could not build apartments or condos on those without changing the land use and zoning.
And could we do that?
Change the land use and
That could be
zoning?
part of the process. So yeah, for example, if you're the school district or another government agency that has some property and you might want to dispose of it, you'd benefit from an upzone, wouldn't you?
There is a process set up to make a zoning map amendment and a land use amendment. I'm, to be honest, not sure exactly how in-depth that process is at the city of Santa Barbara. Maybe Ms. DeBus could speak more to that. I know that it doesn't happen very often.
Okay. We don't need to go there. I just was curious.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. or Madam Chair. I'm done with my questions for now.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Commissioner Higgins.
Can everyone hear me now? Okay,
Yep.
I had to reboot my whole system. Yesterday was Edison and today it's Cox. It's continues to require flexibility. Commissioner Lodge, were you up next with questions? You're still muted, Commissioner Lodge.
Always. Why it is so much more difficult with a small lot? Is it that in a part of it that the soft costs are pretty much the same for a small lot as they are for a larger one? This would be a question for Mr. Barker.
Thank you, Commissioner. That is certainly one reason that the soft costs sort of don't scale downward in the same way that they would scale upward for a small versus large project. But I would also say that it is in large part due to just site constraints that JKA might actually be able to speak to a little bit more in depth in terms of some of the challenges that are inherent in working within those smaller lot configurations.
Are they available?
Yes, we're here. Hold on. There, I'm here now, hopefully. I think that in general, just in general, it's more expensive to build on smaller lots than larger lots because you don't have the same types of efficiencies. So it does scale both in terms of soft costs as well as hard costs. So like, for instance, you bring a bulldozer out to a small site and you do work during the course of a day, the same bulldozer will actually get a lot more done on a big lot in one day. So I don't know. I didn't feel we were constrained in doing the small projects per se. I think that we were a little bit challenged when we walked back and forth with BAE and staff about what we wanted to accomplish on the small lots. And I think the easiest way to describe it is, how do we deal with parking on small lots? Do we make the choice to not put the parking in garages? We were working with smaller FARs. We knew that if we put the parking in garages, it began to limit the amount of residential area that could be built, because those also tended to be the lower FAR sites. So it was a whole bevy of things, but just in general, yes. It's generally less efficient and more expensive to build on smaller lots.
Okay. Thank you. That's my only question.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Commissioner Wiscombe, questions? Hold on, we can't hear you.
No, you can't. You couldn't hear me because I was trying to get my mouse arrow over to my microphone to turn it on. I couldn't find it on the screen.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay. I just want to start. This may be for Ms. Metzger or Mr. Barker. I'm not sure which one. But the staff report, my questions are more in the weeds, as they usually are. Staff report on page 1 to 2 says the maximum allowable FAR would vary based on location in the city with consideration of the city's historic resources and neighborhoods. So the draft FAR map delineates the Brinkerhoff Historic District, but there's no delineation, or it seems like no consideration given to El Pueblo Viejo. And Mr. Sweeney alluded to this, and I just like to know how this, if this was addressed, or if it's the majority of it is, Central Business District, and how is it going to be addressed?
Yes, Chair Schwartz and Commissioner Wiscombe. So we received the direction from City Council to protect the Brinkerhoff Historic District, which is existing, and also the two proposed districts. And so, Mr. Bolton, if you bring up the map and zoom into the Brinkerhoff area, you'll notice that this area, so you can see that hatch with the peach and then the hatch with the blue is Brinkerhoff. Right. Those are the historic districts that we were directed to protect, and we chose to protect those by making it the lower FAR, both in those districts themselves and also on the parcels adjacent to those districts. So that is how we are protecting those historic districts. And in regards to historic resources, we do have protections already in place for our historic resources in the city, including the CEQA analysis that must be done. And so that's how it's protected in this area.
So are you saying then that in FAR 3.0, there will be sites where you're not going to be able to attain that?
I think that it would be easiest to show the slides, or maybe Mr. Gullett can continue.
Yeah, I don't know if we have this slide available showing our existing historic resources, but there are hundreds in the downtown. That, as Ms. Metzger mentioned, they are protected by our policies and through environmental review. So if those protected resources are in the FAR 3.0 area, it's very unlikely that could be achieved on those particular parcels. So it is parcel by parcel.
Okay, not achieved on those particular parcels, but what about adjacent parcels? I mean, that's really what I'm referring to here.
Like subject to our review process.
Okay. So what you're saying then is that the review process, if you own a site that's an FAR 3.0, it's still subject to a review process that may eliminate the 3.0. Is that right?
If there are historic resources, yes, that's correct. And also keeping in mind, some of our largest buildings are in the 3.0 area, and those include some historic resources as well. So just because it's a historic resources doesn't necessarily mean it's small, especially in the core of downtown.
No, I understand that. I understand that. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. So, okay, I guess I won't go to edge conditions then, because the majority of the commissioners in our August 5th meeting had emphasized the importance of not only historic districts, but edge conditions. And Mr. Sweeney has sent us correspondence on several occasions to that effect and spoke today. So I'm gathering that the analysis in this report, and I understand it's an economic feasibility report, but it hasn't, I guess this would be for Mr. Barker, was consideration given to these comments made at the Planning Commission meeting by a majority of the commissioners on August 5th? Did these come up during your interviews with professionals, the protection of historic resources or edge conditions that the Planning Commission pointed to?
Certainly, I think that we did look to incorporate that feedback that was provided. It may be that I need a little bit more clarification on what defines an edge condition. By taking the lowest FAR zone on the map with sort of the smallest possible lot size on which one could potentially configure a new development, and then looking at the flip side on the 3.0, which is the highest FAR zone allowable on a large site. That was our attempt at getting to address some of the feedback that we heard from the commissioners at the last meeting.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, and then Mr. Barker, you'd stay on because I think these questions are all for you here. So the staff report, well, this one is page 4 of 80. This one I think is for, I'm not sure who this is for. The staff report on page 4 of 80 under the first bullet point says increase inclusionary in lieu fees to make feasibility of small tier 1 and tier 2 projects that pay an in lieu fee more similar to the feasibility of tier 3 developments. But then I'm hearing in your report that the policy recommendation is to potentially consider reducing affordability requirements on smaller sites. Is that so? Did you find something different than what staff is saying here? Is that for the smaller sites?
I am not sure that I'm entirely, I'm sorry, following the question.
Okay. So this talks about increasing inclusionary housing in lieu fees. So these small tier 1 and tier 2 projects with less than 10 units pay in lieu fees as opposed to providing a unit. And you've already said that that's cheaper than providing a unit. But then you say in your recommendations, and this is on page 40 of 80, which is page 30 in your report. I'd have to go there. I was just, I'm confused by what the message is here. On page 40 of 80, you say, under recommendation number 2, consider additional incentives to facilitate residential development on small sites. And then at the end, you say one of the ways to do it is to reduce affordability requirements.
I see what you're saying. So there are, got it. There are a number of steps that the city could, in theory, take. It can be a multi-pronged approach to helping feasibility along on those smaller sites. One could be, in certain cases, reducing those affordability requirements. But you could also simultaneously be charging in lieu fees to still make sort of those projects have, a feasibility result such that you still get that inclusionary unit, which is, I think, what everybody would like to see be the end goal. So I think that there are multiple sort of ways to, go about the challenges of addressing financial feasibility on small lots. One of those could, in theory, be reducing the affordability requirement, but that's only one of several.
So reducing affordability requirements, it actually means on these smaller sites, in some cases, reducing the in lieu fees. Is that correct? Is that what you mean by that?
No, because I think when we're talking about reducing in lieu fees, it's for a very specific subset of projects, and that's for those projects that are fewer than 10 units. But we have large projects that are greater than 10 units that are, well, I don't call them large projects in our FAR 3 zone that are on small sites. aren't paying in lieu fees. They're providing the on-site affordable units because they are, 50, 60, 70 units. So when we say small sites, we don't necessarily mean small projects.
Okay.
You can have.
I guess I get it.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Do you have something else to add?
Oh, that was it.
Okay. Okay. I just, the staff report refers to tier 1 and tier 2 projects. So you've gotten into tier 3. So I'm still a little bit confused, but I'll just move on here for the sake of time. Okay. And then your report, on page 4, which is 14 of 80 in our packet, excuse me, recommendation number 5 states, consider reductions in residential parking outside the CBD. I get that because I know Mr. Kulinski said it's really expensive to park cars on these small sites. I just heard him say that, but I just wondered if did you in your study, or when you're talking to the developers, the interviewees, as I'll call them, did you hear testimony at all from any of them that a lot of the neighborhoods in this town are already parking challenged, and that's a concern? That certainly is true around City College. So, or did you not get into those kinds of specifics?
Peripherally, I think that we heard that insofar as that it can be challenging for some developers to get financing for projects if they are parking at less than 1 per unit. And so, that certainly lends itself to folks not necessarily if that incentive were available, they wouldn't necessarily avail themselves of it. But in the right circumstance, let's say you're outside the CBD in one of the zones that allows for a little bit more intensity, say, there could in theory be some projects that could benefit from a slightly lower than 1-to-1 ratio. And that will always enhance feasibility if appropriate for that project.
Okay, great. And then I wanted to go a little bit into the practitioner interviews that you talked about. This was on page 18 of 80 in our packet. Page 8 of your report. So you interviewed 14 professionals in 9 different meetings. So I'm assuming that some of these meetings had more than one interviewee in them. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So were any of the interviewees partners in ownership or development? In other words, did you interview anywhere you had a partnership and both people showed up?
I would need to go back and check my notes, but I can't recall.
Okay. And the only reason I asked that question is because if you have 2 partners sitting at the table with you and they both have the same opinion, their opinion could count as double impact when it's really.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at here. So that's why I wanted to know. Pardon?
Sure, I appreciate that question. I just want to sort of reiterate, the inputs that we sort of were hoping to have from the practitioner interviews inform our analysis were not meant to be exhaustive, and we certainly relied on sort of corroborating what we heard with our experience with other current development projects elsewhere in Southern California. So I would say that what we learned was certainly not taken at face value. and we very rigorously vetted every input that we did receive via other channels as well. So just want to underscore that for the commission.
Okay, because that was going to get to another one of my questions. So okay, and then were all the interviewees local, or were there some who were developers, property owners from other counties that have property interest in Santa Barbara?
I do know that we had, developers with local experience, which, it's very important. Santa Barbara is a very unique community that has a very specific way that sort of developments are shepherded through the process. And so that was extremely important input for us to gather. But I am fairly certain that our interviewees were also experienced in projects elsewhere, so outside Santa Barbara County. And so I think that even sort of underscored the fact that they were able to sort of speak to what made Santa Barbara development experience especially unique, and that we were able to capture in our analysis.
Okay, so when you talk in your report about that the consultant team reviewed information from other recent projects within the region is Southern California. Is that what you're saying, or?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. And when you looked at the region, as I'll call it, because that's what you call it in your report, and you took analysis from the region, was there consistency with the interviewees, or did your conclusions change or were altered when you looked within the region?
I would have to go back and sort of check. There were quite a few inputs that we received, and I think we'd also sort of mentioned that they came in a lot of different formats. We got information in terms of cost per square foot, costs that included or excluded the cost of parking, whether the prices were on a gross square foot or a net square foot. So there was a lot of sort of triangulation involved. Okay. And so I think that it was certainly, there was a lot that went into getting at those final numbers, including looking at other projects that were, and I would say specifically, let's say coastal Southern California.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. And then I had a question, because on page 14 of your report, which is 24 in our packet, under financial feasibility analysis, the report says you use static pro forma models for financial feasibility. So I understand pro forma models, their conceptual level of planning, as you stated, but what are static pro forma models? I'm not familiar with that term. What does that mean?
So static pro forma models, in contrast to what we would call a cash flow like a multi-year cash flow analysis.
Okay.
That's sort of a level of granularity that goes beyond sort of our conceptual, like, for example, the diagrams that we're working with.
Okay.
Is meant to sort of be.
I get it. Yeah. It's economic speak that's above my level. So now I get it once you said the comparison. So, okay. You already said you looked beyond Santa Barbara for your analysis too. So I want to just go, I just have a couple more questions. Under the key pro forma assumptions, which are on page 46, and that's 56 of 80 in our packet, you discussed market rate residential rents in the project area. Is the project area the city of Santa Barbara?
We looked specifically at AUD projects, And so by definition, I think that our sample size was the geography encompassed by the current AUD overlays.
Okay, which occur in quite a few areas of our city. So, okay. So we had a letter, I don't know if you've read it, came on time from Allied Neighborhood Association, and also data that I've personally seen, because I went, whoa, when I saw your kind of average rental rates for Santa Barbara. It seemed like they were too low, and particularly for the CBD. So I'm wondering, shouldn't higher rents in the CBD be tied to your FAR 3.0 for analysis of financial feasibility? In other words, you used a rental rate for a 2-bedroom, I think, of $3,400, which is way low for what one can expect to rent a 2-bedroom, 2-bath for in the CBD. And I can use what's the project? Anatega as an example, which is the one at 634 Anacapa, much higher rents. So.
Sure, I can answer that. So,
are you getting the gist of my question?
Yeah, absolutely. So we took the AUD project database as a starting point and cross-referenced those buildings with the most current rents on a per square foot basis, as reported by CoStar. I think due to the fact that current density guidelines encourage at present a larger share of 2 and 3 bedrooms, and larger unit sizes, so they don't exceed that density that is currently in place. We adjusted our prototypes to account for a comparatively larger share of studios and 1-bedrooms, and that were also likely smaller, but we did apply those per square foot rents to those smaller unit sizes. And so I think that what we're seeing is just the net effect of maintaining that sort of price per square foot that you're seeing with those larger units currently that are sort of hamstrung by that density maximum, density maximum, and applying those to smaller unit sizes. So that is sort of, part of the reason, I think part of the response to that comment.
But so I think I'm following you, but isn't, for financial feasibility, if you're a developer and you're working on a property in the CBD, you, in your analysis, you're not getting 3,400, and I know you equated it to a square foot cost or square foot basis, but you're not getting 3,400 for the 2-bedroom, 2-bath. You're getting 5,500 for the 2-bedroom, 2-bath, or 5,400 for the 2-bedroom, 2-bath. So I'm just asking specifically if that enters into your financial analysis where the rents are higher. And I know the costs are higher, but.
Sure. I think I see what you're getting at. That corresponding 2-bedroom unit whose prices you're quoting are likely larger 2-bedrooms than the 2-bedrooms that we're modeling. And
okay.
We're, just due to the fact that you are sort of, developers are in theory now have the flexibility to sort of configure their units in a little bit more of an efficient layout. But I'd also say that we were, being in order to sort of not overestimate feasibility again, I wouldn't say we're erring on the conservative side, but we're wanting to sort of not overreach in terms of allowable rents, just because there's a finite pool of residents who could in theory afford to pay $5,500 for a 2-bedroom.
That's right. Yeah. No, I get that. Okay. Thank you for that. That's all my questions. And I appreciate the report, and I appreciate your presentation today and answering the questions. Thank you. I just have one more question, I think, for Ms. Metzger, maybe, or Mr. Gollett. And that's that's related to the letters we've received about the environmental impacts of increased density. If we go to an FAR system, you know, we're going to get more units, more density, blah, blah, blah. So how do we handle these environmental impacts? Do we go through the process and identify them for water, sewer, stormwater, traffic, parking, the whole 9 yards?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about what the procedure is?
Well, through the chair, Commissioner Wiscombe, I had held off on our last two slides because Chair Schwartz wasn't here yet, and I wanted to make sure that she saw our next step slides. And I think these kind of answer that question. So maybe Mr. Bolton, if we can go to the next steps. So we are going to be returning to the Planning Commission on November 4th for your input. And we're going to be looking at a variety of things that have kind of come up over the last month, including changing from density to FAR and the environmental impacts of that. We realize that we need more analysis of that on a CEQA standpoint. And then additionally, with the passage of SB 9, the build out for the city with the FAR changes and new AUD standards all kind of need to be looked at together with our program EIR update. And so although we had this really aggressive timeline, we feel like we cannot complete moving to the FAR this year. But what we can do is continue to work on the code amendments for FAR and also code amendments that are not to do with FAR, but to do with just changing the average unit size density incentives out of that chapter and in throughout the rest of the code. So we will be coming back to Planning Commission, like I said, on November 4th with certain issue areas. And I think if you go to the next slide, Mr. Bolton. So we'll be coming back to you with, it's kind of like how we did the ENZO, which I think a few of you were here for. Many meetings where we brought certain issues just to really dive into them. So on November 4th, we're going to be looking at Planning Commission as the decision-making body for those projects on 10,000 square foot lots or more. And that requires an entirely new permitting process and entirely new findings. And so we want to really look at those with the Planning Commission and make sure, first of all, is this even the right route that we want to go? If BAE is recommending streamlining, and that means, per Commissioner Higgins' question, less meetings, do we want to add another meeting to this process? So we'll be talking about that. We'll also look at open yard standards and changes to those. Based on the prototypes that JKA made with us, we realized that our open yard standards might not be the most up to date for what kind of products are being built in multi-unit housing. And then looking at the community benefit findings, and then presenting to you options for adaptive reuse and the non-conforming uses. And then finally going over another question, I think, from Mr. Higgins is, do we want to treat condominiums and apartments differently? Or should they just be treated the same and we have two tiers? So nothing is going to be completed for this year on the FAR, but we will be making progress in the larger efforts for making permanent multi-unit housing standards. I hope that answers.
That does answer it. Thank you. That was very thorough. I guess my follow-up question is, the AUD program expires in February of next year. Is that right? I think that's what I remember. So
that's correct.
Do you anticipate going to council to extend that deadline further with all this work that needs to be done?
That'll be something that we have to do, yes.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that. And thank you, Ms. Metzger, for your presentation and all your hard work, and you're getting some information to me and the rest of my fellow commissioners that I had asked for. I really appreciate it, and I am through and signing off. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Who would like to go next with questions? Commissioner Reed, please.
Yeah, hi, Chair Schwartz. I don't have any additional questions with the exception of just one clarification. Ms. Metzger, you put up a slide. I think it showed the calculated FARs for existing AUD projects downtown.
Yes.
Would you mind bringing that back up?
I think he's referring to the map, Mr.
Yeah,
Reed,
the map.
with the dots. Yes. While Mr. Bolton finds that, Commissioner Reed, do you want to ask me the question? I think it's on page 39, Mr. Bolton. Or that, yeah, that works too.
Okay, great. So, and these are built or projects in process?
That is correct. In the pipeline.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so everything in our central business district is at or below a 2.5, correct?
Through the chair, Commissioner Reed, that's correct at this point in time.
Okay. Great. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Does everyone ask questions? No. Commissioner Bonderson, good to see you.
Hi, thank you. Nice to see you as well. Yes, I was waiting to see what kind of questions would come up, and I'm so glad I did that because Commissioner Wiscombe covered so many of mine. I had one follow-up question. I believe it would probably be best to go to the consultant if I can have him pop back up. Hello, Mr. Barker. Thank you for being here today. You are a plethora of information, and some of it is very complex, but I wanted to revisit the conversation you had just a few moments ago with Commissioner Wiscombe about the 2 and 3 bedroom rents and how you came to your calculation and how that was being read by her and as well as by me. I'm glad you had that conversation together. My follow-up question is, since a big part of today's hearing is to have a little bit of back and forth and work together to find ways to develop further the report, I was interested to know if you would consider revisiting the numbers that you are currently using for the 2 and 3 bedroom rents, simply to make the numbers more realistic, more reasonable for our community when we look at it. I want to make sure that we connect with those numbers because they don't seem quite real to us. They seem low to us. How do you plan on resolving that, or are you planning on leaving it alone?
We certainly don't want to leave anything alone or on the table. I think that we would want to discuss that and we're open to that. We would sort of want to circle back with city staff on how that process would look.
Fantastic. And I'm assuming that once that piece shifts, all of the other kind of areas on the map may shift as well. Is that correct? They all sort of fall into each other based on one gets increased, the other one will probably likely increase to be reasonable for our community?
I don't want to say what will sort of end up happening with the model before we sort of go through that.
Okay, that's fair enough. I understand. We'll see what happens once you start. My next question will probably, well, let me stick with you, Mr. Barker. I wanted you to help guide me a little bit with the current report. I wanted to just understand the Milpas corridor a little bit better. We often talk about the CBD and wanted to know how comfortable you are right now to speak about the Milpas corridor.
I would probably want to defer to city staff on that question.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Metzger, if you're available.
Yes, Commissioner Bonderson, what specifically would you like to talk about on Milpas?
Thank you, Ms. Metzger. Nice to see you. I was just interested in sort of understanding how, if anything, has been done in relationship between the different the different breakdown of the areas: Milpas, Haley, around City College, Delavina, Upper State, and the list goes on. La Cumbre Plaza, Cairial. I was interested specifically because there has been a lot of public comment with regard to the neighborhood context, to the edge conditions in particular, reference to different state bills. Believe at least 2 or 3 of our public commenters just today spoke about some of the state bills. And I was curious to understand what has or potentially what will be developing with edge conditions. How are we as a city staff, how are we looking at that transition between, you know, it's not just a hard line. How are you as a city planner looking at those edge conditions and trying to resolve some of the things that the commenters are so concerned about?
Yes, thank you through the chair, Commissioner Bonderson. So edge conditions are something that has been brought up basically since I started working on the AUD program. And so it is on our radar for the very specific code amendments. It's not something that's kind of high level to talk about at this point in time, because honestly, we're still working it out. On another topic, our objective design standards, we have a really great consultant there, and I've been talking to him about how to treat these edge conditions, as well as how to do some sort of additional standards for adjacency to historic merit structures. So we are working on that, but we don't have answers yet. And so it will be nice to have a little more time to get that done also.
Well, that's a perfect transition to my last question. It's with regard to what you just presented a moment ago, again with, I believe it was Commissioner Wiscombe, and you popped in and you talked about your timeline. I wanted to know, what is your new estimated timeline, if there even is one? I know you're revisiting us in November, but do you have, and you've kind of pushed back all of the timeline milestones. Do you have a specific estimate? That sounds funny. Do you have a more clear sort of end milestone you're looking at?
Yes, through the chair, Commissioner Bonderson, we don't have exact dates past November 4th at this point in time. We do know that we also want to go with BAE, our consultants, and do this presentation to City Council and ask them these same questions on that slide about the mapping and the tiers and whatnot. So this gives us time to do that, but we don't have exact dates.
Miss Brooks, maybe we have more here.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Bonderson, yes, Ms. Metzger is correct. I just wanted to add a little bit more to context for other things sort of related to this work effort, so you get the full picture, but she's correct about this effort. So as you see on the slide, with the passage of Senate Bill 9, we are shifting some resources priorities to address that, hopefully by the end of the year, or very close to the end of the year. So the objective of today's hearing with the Planning Commission, and then on November 4th, though, is to continue this conversation, further the eventual transition from the AUD program to whatever it might be, multi-unit housing standards into the future, so that we can get a solid project description and for our environmental review. So the more that we can understand from the Planning Commission and then forward that to the City Council, we'll feel more confident that when we consider potential build out under Senate Bill 9 and multi-unit housing standards, whatever the metric is, density or FAR, that we'll be more confident about what we're studying and then understand the full impacts of that. So that will take some more time. But we've already started working on some other amendments to the zoning ordinance that have the objective of streamlining the review process and cleaning up some text changes that just need some clarification, and anything else we can do to further our objectives that don't affect ultimate housing unit build out. We do want to continue making progress on those over the next few months. So you'll be seeing probably some items coming up on your upcoming agendas in the next few months related to code amendments that aren't specifically related to switching to FAR, but have all these other aspects of housing development standards wrapped into them, as Ms. Metzger said.
Thank you, Ms. Brooke. What I hear is that there's a lot of stuff happening and it's all concurrent. So I appreciate the explanation. And also thank you, Ms. Metzger. I appreciate your explanation as well. Madam Chair, that concludes my questions. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonderson. Anyone else have questions? I don't know who may have. There we go, Vice Chair Escobedo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Give me 1 second while we get this together. So I just have a few questions. I think all of them are going to be for staff. So Ms. Metzger, I think that these would be appropriate for you. When considering some of the incentives that are on the table for us to offer at higher tiers for more affordability, could one of those incentives be higher height by right? So have that, rather than based on location, based on affordability?
As through the chair, Commissioner Escobedo, that could be something that we could look at, as if you provide affordability above that rental unit map, then you could increase the height by right, but we are very limited by our charter in how high that can be. So in the areas like the east side and the west side, where you have zoning that's multifamily, we can't go above 45 feet. So those areas wouldn't qualify for that additional height. But in the areas where we have CG and MC zones, commercial and manufacturing commercial, you can right now request that community benefit to go up to 65 feet. And so that could be something on the table to allow with findings by right for staff.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, we have a hard cap based on zoning on the east and west side. I'm not thinking citywide, but there might be areas appropriate for it. We would have to change the zoning then in order to go above that 45-foot cap.
Commissioner Escobedo, just to clarify, I think I said 65 feet. It's 60 feet is the ceiling in those commercial zones. So at this point in time, the city charter is what limits us to 45 feet. And to make a change to the charter, you have to have a vote of the people. And so it would be a very in-depth process to get above that 45 feet.
And I understand that part, but the charter, and maybe I'm misunderstanding this part, the charter is just dictates the cap for that zoning. But if we change the zoning on, let's say, the Milpas corridor to be commercial, it would then be able to go above that 45 with a cap at 60 feet. Is that right?
I might ask one of my staff members to come on and help me, because I'm not quite sure I'm understanding your question. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm probably not phrasing it well. Mr. Goulet?
Yeah, Chair Schwartz, Vice Chair Escobedo, the charter does limit by the zoning type. So if there was a rezone, it would increase the potential height limit. So we have that in the CG and MC zones. There's the potential to go up to 60, but the height limit is 48 for AUD projects currently.
Okay, and so so that does answer my question. So then it would be a process of rezoning, and is that a potential, is that on the table in this discussion? Is that on the table for a future discussion when we're updating our housing element? When is it appropriate for us to address that part? And I think my next question will give some inclination as to why I'm asking this.
Chair Schwartz, Vice Chair Escobedo, this is the first time this has been brought up. I think it's something that we would like to think about as staff, and we can talk with City Council when we bring this study to them. I think that would be the best timing.
Okay. So then let me ask this question to either you, Mr. Gollett, or Ms. Metzger. I'm thinking more about our nonprofit developers, our housing authority, who do typically 100% affordable projects. And what I'm curious about is, why are the development standards the same? Why are we providing them the same as a project that's 20% affordable units with that inclusionary? Is there a way for us to provide maybe a fourth tier of an FAR map that provides incentives like greater height by right, allowing them to max a faster, streamlined process, fewer discretionary decisions, more ministerial decisions in the process? Because most of the time they're being funded by subsidized dollars, and it should be one of our goals to make sure that it's as efficient as possible, so it takes fewer of those dollars and we get to realize those units quicker.
Yes, Chair Schwartz, Vice Chair Escobedo, totally agree. Typically, they can qualify for state density bonus law that allows them relief from some of the limitations we have with zoning. We can bring back more details on that November 4th too. So it's effectively another tier of development potential.
Right, but is there a way for us to build it into the FAR system? If we're going to switch to this, why are we not building something that gives them a little bit of an advantage, because they're typically at a disadvantage because they're so reliant on grant funding and subsidy funding, which isn't always available. So this is one way of us providing some sort of subsidy.
It is. I think it would be good for our conversation if we had the details of what a nonprofit developer could get under state law, and maybe there's something we're missing in between tier 3 and what a nonprofit developer could get under state law.
Would you be comfortable reaching out and doing that research between now and November 4th? And so at that November 4th hearing, bring back something?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Gollett. This question is regarding the transition. If we were to make the transition from the AED program, which is based on density, to an FAR program, I'm curious about what happens to development rights in regard to, I recall a project, I think it might have been 410 State when it came to Planning Commission, where there might have been multiple parcels and they consolidated the development potential to one area of those adjoined parcels. When we switch to something like FAR, do those parcels that basically contributed their development units, do they then get the opportunity to develop new units under this FAR program? I don't know if I phrased that correctly or if that makes sense, but.
Chair Schwartz, Vice Chair Escobedo, that's one of the details we would need to be working out with our zoning ordinance changes. So this will be part of our subsequent hearings and the details of what comes with the zoning ordinance to implement this. We are looking at a lot of different sections of the zoning ordinance, including non-conforming. So we will have this conversation.
Perfect. One thing that I'm wondering if has come up in your conversations is we hear a lot about rental prices being high for a number of reasons, and one of those reasons is often stated to be amenities that are provided within the project. And one thing that I've been thinking through is, I wonder if it's possible, and I would love to know your thoughts on this, to, when projects come to Planning Commission or even are submitted to staff, if we can require a gross FAR and then also a livable FAR, which would possibly give us some information on how much of that building is actually dedicated to livable area. So the actual area within the unit that might provide an opportunity to provide feedback and include in our decision-making process to maybe disincentivize some of those amenities and contribute more of that space to living area.
Chair Schwartz, Vice Chair Escobedo, I haven't seen that done. It's an interesting idea. I'd like to explore that more. Maybe another approach could be we limit the amount of open space. You have to have a minimum, but maybe there's a maximum as well.
Okay, thank you. Is that something that you could bring back in November 4th as well? Because we are going to be talking about open yard requirements. I don't know if that's exactly the same.
I'd like to bring it back. I can't promise November 4th. I think we need to look into that some.
Okay, that's fine.
So one of these subsequent meetings.
Okay, thank you. Those are all of my questions. I really appreciate it, Mr. Wilt. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Escobedo. Any other colleagues have questions? Either, again, I'm not sure if somebody might have gone before I joined you, or if you have any follow-on questions before I ask my questions. I'll just wait a moment and see if anybody wants to turn on their camera. Okay, I'll go ahead and start, and whoever might want to come back in, feel free. Mr. Busk, may I ask you a question first? I've heard a term mentioned, and I'm not finding it in our packet. Both by one of my colleagues, a commissioner, as well as a member of the public, has used this term edge condition, but I can't find it anywhere in our development standards or even in our packet. Am I overlooking anything?
Chair Schwartz, you are correct. That is not a term that we have defined in our zoning ordinance or other policy documents.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think my next question is going to go to the consultants. Let me see who might be. And I'll let you, either Mr. Barker or Mr. Kaliski, or both of you, join me here. I want to come back to page 18 of 80 in our packet. So if we could have that up on the screen, please. This is, again, to practitioner interviews. The first paragraph, close to the bottom of the first paragraph, there's a reference to what the interview discussions included. So if you would just blow that up a little bit. My question to you about construction costs, land costs, operating expenses, capitalization rates, developer profit thresholds, and let me know if I'm overlooking something in our packet, Mr. Barker. Did you get a snapshot of these financials, or were you looking at that plus a trajectory of these costs as you might have factored them into your methodology, your modeling?
Thank you, Chairwoman Schwartz. We did not request any financial documentation from our interviewees. We took extensive notes during the multiple interviews. And with respect to your question about trajectory, we weren't trying to sort of project into the future. This was very much sort of what we call like a static pro forma snapshot of the current development environment.
Okay. All right. And then to the next page, page 19 of 80 in our packet, at the very top of the page, there's a reference here that some of the interviewees' specific assumptions might be out of date or slightly outside of their areas of expertise. When you encountered this, did you remove these assumptions from your formula, your methodology? Or how did that factor in? Maybe that's the broader question I have for you here.
Essentially, yes. I think that, any input that we received that wasn't sort of applicable to the task at hand, I think we, sort of, I wouldn't say tossed out, but we sort of, set aside, but we certainly sort of more heavily weighed the responses that we sort of were able to corroborate with up-to-date data.
Okay. Then I'd like to, let me see if this is a question for you. Yes, let me ask you about in lieu fees. And again, I don't know if this is both to you and Mr. Kaliski, so I'll let you decide. I think it was back in 2019, I did some research nationwide in terms of cities that had implemented policies on in lieu fees, on-site construction versus the allowance of in lieu fees. And here again, you'll have to direct me to somewhere in the packet if I've not seen this. I'm wondering if you've also been able to evaluate the efficacy, kind of strategic efficacy of allowing in lieu fees tied to a program that a public agency, city or county has relative to an intention of getting affordable units constructed at another site, not on site, but at another parcel. So when I see this as, let me elaborate a little bit. I see this as a two-part question for us strategically as a city. If our intention is to encourage, incent more small A affordable units, and we're going to allow a property owner, developer to not build them on site for one or more reasons. The lingering question in my mind is the pragmatic or realistic scenario of just extracting money from a developer, but then not getting affordable units actually constructed in the community. And I've been a bit of a skeptic. Some know that when I discuss this with folks. So what can you share with us about, or did you even consider the relationship between this modeling and then how do we get to the end state through an effective in lieu program that actually gets affordable units constructed at another site? Does that make sense to you? Is my question making sense?
I think I can sort of get at different parts of that question, certainly, Madam Chair. Certainly, many cities throughout California have in lieu fees currently in place. Typically, they are never so high as that they're actually able to produce that affordable unit. I think if you have a program that is comprehensive enough and wide-reaching enough, eventually you are able to collect sufficient funds, not necessarily to construct wholesale, but certainly leverage with perhaps public dollars, and I think that's what most cities end up having to do. I would say that developing a more sort of refined in lieu fee program was a little bit outside the scope of this work exercise that we were doing. But I think specifically, if as you state that the ideal intent would be to get that affordable unit produced, whether on or off site. And I would also add that a lot of cities do allow for an option to, if there are site constraints, for example, that you could produce the unit on a different site, but that in order to sort of level the playing field, the current in lieu fee would need to be raised to at least incentivize a developer to opt in to that tier 3 as opposed to staying within their tier 2 at the building size that does not require the on-site unit.
Okay. Hang tight for a moment there, Mr. Barker. I want to ask Mr. Gullett to come on with a follow-on question, a related question regarding in lieu. Mr. Gullett, if my colleagues would support me in asking staff to flesh this out a little bit more, and that is to consider a more robust in lieu fee program that has a greater likelihood in a shorter period of time of expending the monies or allocating the monies in an encouraging, incentivizing way for one or more property owners to get these units constructed, because I've just not seen that over the years. Is that something, would you need to go back to council to get that direction, or is that something even in broad terms that you could brainstorm with us on November 4th? What are your thoughts about that, Mr. Gullett?
Yeah, among the concurrent things we'll be doing in the next year and a half is the housing element update. And in lieu fees is certainly a topic we'll look at. One thing I want to explore with it too is making existing apartments affordable and in perpetuity or close to it with these in lieu funds, rather than just build new. But those conversations will be happening next year with our policies and the housing element. But it is something to start talking about now for sure.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Gullett. Let's see, where am I going from here? Mr. Barker, and again, anyone else who would like to join us for this, I'm interested in the relationship between economic feasibility and actual production relative to incenting density or connecting an incentive for density with two other things: adaptive reuse and workforce, restricted workforce housing for a local workforce. Is that something either you've looked at, and again, maybe it's buried here somewhere, or not, but your firm has done? You're familiar with how to kind of craft those types of policies and programs so that we both lift density in the right areas of our community while also encouraging the type of development that we want. So not just volume or numbers, but also, like I said, adaptive reuse, and then who occupies these units? Our workforce, our local workforce.
Sure, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. With respect to the adaptive reuse question, we didn't look at adaptive reuse per se. I think that, in general, those buildings that exist have a finite FAR that one can calculate. And so as part of an effort to move from a density-based standard to an FAR standard, unless you're sort of adding on to that existing building, that's sort of a slightly different approach that we weren't looking at. But it is my understanding that you could, in theory, if that's something that council and the commission wants to take a look at, that you could certainly carve out preferences for a local workforce as part of any sort of change in policy direction related to, say, adaptive reuse. And
Mr. Polisky?
I just wanted to add one simple comment outside of our direct study, because as Aaron said, we didn't look at that per se. That wasn't our scope. But And you may be very, very aware of this. And the only reason I'm bringing it up is I was one of the people who did the early studies for the adaptive reuse ordinance in Los Angeles. And the key there is planning, of course, but it's also building code relief, because what you're talking about is change of occupancy. And under current building codes, if you just did it straight, you would need to bring those buildings up to current building code, which in many cases could be quite difficult. So at least in the city of Los Angeles, the main thing that made the adaptive reuse ordinance work and produce literally thousands of units was targeted relief from some of the requirements of having to bring the buildings up to current code with the change of occupancy. And that's something that was studied, was figured out. They've tweaked it a little bit over the years. Started off in the downtown, and it's gradually expanded to other parts of the city. But Santa Barbara could look at things like that if they wanted to, but it was outside of our scope.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I read about you being, oh, there's a thumbs up from Commissioner Higgins. Mr. Kaliski, I think as I was doing some research on you, I think I read about your involvement with that. I'm just going to put this on the table for my colleagues to consider. I'm very interested in direct incentivizing of adaptive reuse. And I think this is a real missed opportunity for our city, an old city, built out city with some beautiful older buildings that we could bring into the 21st century with mixed use. But there are challenges. And so how do we help that along? Thank you, Mr. Kaliski. So I'm going to leave that with Mr. Gullett and Ms. Metzger as something that I would strongly desire, and ask my colleagues to please consider supporting me in asking staff to pursue as well. I'd like to, I think it's Ms. Metzger, maybe just my final questions on slides 41 and 42 in the PowerPoint. Let me go to, let's see, which one was mentioned, the open yard standards? Was that 42?
Yes, the next one.
The next one. I thought that I heard you very quickly mention something about open yard standards changing, and I didn't quite catch the reference. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, so Chair Schwartz, when we started looking at the code amendments to take the AUD program standards and make it permanent multi-unit housing standards, we realized that there's a rather large discrepancy between the standards that we have if you're not building in AUD for open yard and the ones you do have. And it's also very confusing. We heard from applicants that they're constantly having to ask staff, what does this mean? And they're getting it wrong in their applications. And so we have been working on clarifying language to really simplify what the open yard standards would be. And in addition, we talked to John about what other jurisdictions have been doing, since he's an architect in California and worked so many with other jurisdictions on changes to their ordinance, and got some really good feedback from him on the open yard standards too. So not ready to talk about it more than that today, but ready to present something to you on November 4th.
Well, it certainly sounds like November 4th is going to be a very interesting day from what you've, at least as far as what I find interesting to spend our time on. Let's see, so that was my open yard question. And I think I have an overall process question then for you and Mr. Gullett. I believe it'd be the two of you. I don't know if Mr. Busk needs to join as well. Looking at where we are today and what would be beneficial for us to comment on as a bridge to November 4th.
So
is it these questions in general you'd like us to comment on as we now, we're going to just take like a 5-minute break in a moment, or we could take a 10-minute, I think maybe everybody would like a 10-minute health break. To this slide, Ms. Metzger? Mm-hmm.
Yes, Chair Schwartz, these are the questions that we really want to get your opinions on, because this is the hearing where we have BAE and JKA to help facilitate any answers that, as not an economist, I can't answer. And then we can take the answers that we get from this and work it into what we're moving forward to City Council with the report and also in the code amendments that we're continuing to work on.
Okay, so we'll want to have this slide up when we come back. Let's go ahead and it's 3:10 by my clock. Let's take a 10-minute break and come back at 3:20, and we'll put this slide back up at that time, and we'll have go into our comments. Thanks, everyone. We're in recess. October 7th, 2021. We're going to bring it back to the commission, and would like to ask who of my colleagues would like to go first in terms of, we're going to ask staff to put up the slide, our questions. We have 6 questions here. And Commissioner Reed, you're first.
Thank you, Chair Schwartz. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, just fine.
Okay, great. Okay, so starting with putting numbers in front of these, for questions 2, 3, 4, and 5, just in short, my answer to those would be no. And then I can just give a little bit more color, and that'll also touch on the first and the last. So this is incredible work, and it's complicated work, and I've been quite involved with it. So I'm impressed. This is no easy task. That said, I'm largely uncomfortable pushing forward on this plan, and really it's the tier 3 incentives in particular. And the reason for that is I'm uncomfortable doing that while we have so many pending opportunities for housing that just haven't come to fruition. And those have been touched on today in some of the questions. For instance, in our downtown core, we're discussing new development incentives, but why aren't we first prioritizing the adaptive reuse of our vacant and underutilized spaces? So in saying no, I first say yes to implementing an adaptive reuse ordinance, and so that we can account for the potential affordable housing supply that it would represent. Additionally, a specific plan for La Cumbre Plaza and Sears. There's tremendous opportunity for housing and density there. I even hear there's funding to do that plan. We should be tracking income levels and rents for new and existing ADUs. We've talked a lot about that at Planning Commission. And those can count against the excessive RENA numbers we're always up against. And then I'm happy to hear in November, we'll be talking about SB 9 and 10 and the impact our RENA numbers. I mean, that has a significant impact on our RENA numbers, theoretically. Which impacts our decision-making on new housing policy and incentives, and it impacts our decisions today, the recommendations we're making. So we need to at least be briefed on that first. And I don't know, it was a few months ago, we reviewed the economic development plan, which really highlighted the importance of these public-private partnerships to truly build income-restricted, affordable housing on city-owned lots. And this is just something from my perspective, and I think a lot of folks' perspective, that the private sector alone will never be able to do. The AIA charrette illustrated the potential for these partnerships. And this is a great strategy to get real production in the moderate category without making excessive concessions. So instead of addressing these opportunities, we've talked so much about what's on the table in this study. Again, I appreciate the work effort, but we're talking about dramatically increasing FARs while compromising on important design standards and then pushing building heights to 60 feet in order to gain an additional 5, maybe 10% of affordability. And we give up a lot. I just can't support that. I can't support it given that everything I've just mentioned, and that is yet to come to fruition. So, you know, I ask myself the question, how, I think a lot of people do, how do you incentivize affordability at or above 15 to 20% in new construction without significantly compromising design standards and dramatically exceeding current building height limits? I don't believe you can. I don't believe you can. But we could avoid taking things to this extreme by addressing the issues that I've listed, that we've talked so much about. As far as this study and FAR, it's great to see that slide that shows the FARs for existing and pending projects downtown, and they're at or below 2.5. So unlike tier 3, the proposed tier 2 provides for a max 3.0 FAR. And that's without bonuses and without compromising design or development standards and without pushing our building heights to 60 feet. And according to the language in the study, this enhances the feasibility for deed restricted moderate income projects compared to projects that are built or pending under our existing AUD ordinance, all of which are at or below a 2.5 FAR. So I propose we start here. It's a significant incentive, and we just hold off on the proposed tier 3.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Reed. Commissioner Higgins, were you going to come up next? I think I saw your camera on briefly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The gentleman that was on the camera when I gave him a thumbs up, I forget his last name, but it talked about the adaptive reuse.
Mr. Kaliski.
Thank you, and I'm really glad he chimed in, because bigger picture here, I'm no longer interested or optimistic about the word streamlining. Streamlining development projects has been talked about for as long as I've been in the business, and I'm sure it has for much longer than that. So it's not going to happen at the local level. We don't have the political will to get that done, and it might happen, but it'll happen if the state intervenes. So I don't feel like that's a reachable goal, and it's because it's not really a land use or planning function to streamline things. Planners in our city often get tagged with being the obstacle, but that's just because they're smart enough to interpret the other parts of the other development codes, building, fire, flood, stormwater, creeks, etc. And so until we want to holistically challenge or change other codes, it's just not really achievable that we can get to a streamlined process. Number of hearings is just sort of, I don't know, eye candy or something like that. It's just not going to happen. But I do appreciate the actual adaptive reuse concept, and I think that we should pursue that separately. So that's an exciting thing to hear. Building codes are tough to meet. Would like to learn more about that. What's missing today, and I can't decide for sure if I like the iterative approach to these housing debates, discussions. It's an easy forum for us all with staff, because we're semi-technocrats on this stuff, but it is breaking these things down, and especially with the economics analysis, it's hard for the public to engage and pay attention and understand what's happening. It's hard enough for me to understand what's happening. So I'm looking forward to November 4th when this comes back, to really diving in further. And let me see if I can be clear here. What's missing from I want to give comments on all these things, but I feel like I should withhold, because there's some missing things here today by design, maybe not intentional, but I'm more comfortable as a planning commissioner providing comments or decisions when there's a holistic project in front of us or a holistic ordinance. And right now we're missing staff's recommendations on what to do. We're missing the general plan consistency that puts this whole ordinance in context of how this ordinance affects the rest of the city and our region, quite frankly. And the issue is we have a memo by Commissioner Lodge that was circulated that I think makes my point here. if we want to sit in a silo and talk about AUD projects and how they are affordable, that's one thing, but we're missing how the AUD ordinance is absorbed by the rest of the community. And by that, I mean, when we have new housing stock that's routinely developed in the city, that's a healthy thing to have happen. When AUD projects are developed, it frees up existing housing stock to become less crowded, and it could even become less affordable. Less expensive or more affordable. So that's just a fact of community planning. That's the foundation for the AUD ordinance in context of our general plan. And that's why we have AUD, because it allows the rest of our housing stock to be more equitable. I think the memo by Commissioner Lodge is akin to, we haven't developed rental housing stock for 30 or 40 years. So looking at AUD in a silo is akin to being put on a diet or being starving as an individual for 40 years and then refusing a cracker because you ordered a shrimp Louis salad. Okay, cracker is going to be good. Holding out for a shrimp Louis or some other exotic form of some mystical magic bullet housing policy is missing the larger point. Perfection is the enemy of good enough, and I think that we're on the right track. So even in the staff report on page 2, we have that second paragraph that seems to be misleading. It says the AUD incentive program was developed to expand housing opportunities for households that earn up to 200% AMI. Skip a sentence and it says just that, except it starts with although. But it says the AUD incentive program has increased housing supply for households that earn approximately 160 to 190. So it's a successful project, an ordinance. Has it missed some of the opportunities in the lower income categories? Yes, in and of itself, but you're excluding the existing housing stock that gets freed up by new construction. So I can go back to the slide and give a little bit of feedback to the questions that are being directed at us and get off this little soapbox I'm on. But I would like to see some additional analysis on the FAR map. The public commenter that brought up that particular property, and maybe we just need a little bit more discussion about edge conditions as well, because that particular property is on the edge. And so I'd like to see some additional discussion about the edge, particularly between red and purple. I guess I don't really have enough information to deal with tier 3 because I'm fundamentally still a stick in the mud on encumbering new projects with higher levels of inclusionary housing, because those are generally an impediment to investors. So if we have to get to tier 3 by way of 60 feet, I'm not sure I'm comfortable there. I don't know that we may be giving away too much. So I might be more comfortable with less inclusionary and not monkeying with our height limits too dramatically. Increase in lieu fees for small project and condos. Sure, I really do feel as though we should treat condos the same as apartments. And I don't know about FARs for smaller lots just yet. It seems like that's going to exacerbate or antagonize the edge condition, but I want to think about that further. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Higgins. Who would like to go next? Commissioner Wiscombe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to piggyback on Commissioner Reed and Commissioner Higgins' comments. I'm uncomfortable, particularly with tier 3. I think the Riviera Association called it alarming. And I think I'm uncomfortable with it. We're missing environmental analysis for this kind of density. Commissioner Bonderson talked about the rental analysis that was that's in the economic feasibility study, and I think most of us agree that that's low, particularly for the CBD. So it can't be really supported. The tier 3 can't be supported by that. I agree that we should revisit the Haley Coda area, La Cumbra, for tiers. I think that hasn't been well vetted, as well as Mr. Minus talked about the property at 932 De La Vina, and that was an inconsistency. So there are things that are happening here. Mr. Campanella talked about that there are lots of properties that are in the 1.5 FAR areas. They're dispersed throughout the city, but that hasn't been financially analyzed. I think that was a really important point. I looked at, when Ms. Metzger sent over her data, I looked at 16 properties in the EPV district, and not all of them are in the CBD. Not all of them are built. Some of them are built, some of them are under construction, and some of them are still in permitting. But there were 16 of them, and 31% of them are 5 of the 16 had less than a 1.0 FAR, and 31% of them, another 5 of the 16, had a just greater than 1.0 but less than 1.5 FAR. There was only 3 projects that had a 2.0 to 2.5 FAR. Now, granted, most of them have no inclusionary because that wasn't in effect when a lot of these projects were built. But still, this is telling you something that a move to tier 3 with then another 20% bonus, so 3.6 if you put more affordable units in, it is to me alarming. And it can really change the streetscape in our downtown area. As you can visualize building after building of 3 to 3.6 FAR, and it really exceeds what we have today. And I also think that the public doesn't have a good understanding of FAR. I'm with Commissioner Higgins. I struggle with it myself, and the analysis that we've seen in the report provided. And I think there needs to be more public vetting before we go there. And maybe we bury the FAR in the CBD by lot size. Consideration for adjacency to historic resources and to avoid a canyon effect. I think that's something that we should possibly look at. I think FAR is a better system than AUD, where we've restricted the number of units per acre in AUD, but I'm not on board with the map as shown today. I just don't think we have enough information. There's too many balls in the air before we get there. I wanted to go back to Commissioner Escobedo's questions. A higher height by right. I thought that was an interesting concept, and also a gross FAR versus a livable FAR. I thought that was really interesting. And minimum, maximum open yards, so I think there's a lot more here that needs to be done. So those are kind of my comments on the FAR map. And I'm basically the same as Commissioner Reed on the rest of them. No, 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 and no. So that's where I stand. I thought Commissioner Reed made some really good points today, and I do appreciate the adaptive reuse discussion. I think that's really important, and I think that I think Commissioner Higgins said that's exciting. I agree with that. I think I think that needs more focus, particularly with our aged buildings in our city. So that's pretty much where I stand. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Wiscombe. Commissioner Lodge, were you up next? And before you start, I wanted to ask staff, is it possible to do a split screen to also show the map that's on page, it'll be Exhibit B in our package, page 77 of 80. I don't know if technically it's possible for you to do that, to have both this slide up and the map. Okay. I don't know if the map's too small. I'll let my colleagues comment. Is it too small to be helpful? Commissioner Lodge, what do you think? It is fairly small here, isn't it? Doing split screen. Well, let's just leave it up. Let's see, if there are any other references. I just thought since Commissioner Wiscombe was referencing the map, it might be helpful for us to look at it while we're commenting. Oh, there we go. Very good. Commissioner Wiscombe, did you want to say one thing before we go over to Commissioner Lodge?
Yes, I apologize to Commissioner Lodge. I did forget to mention condos. Commissioner Higgins for many years now has been on the ownership campaign, and I do agree with his comments on ownership. I think that's an important consideration here. There are people here that would love to own a smaller unit and be able to get their foot in the door. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lodge, comments?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'm really pleased that this is we're not trying to make this mad dash anymore to the present end date for the AUD ordinance. As so many letters said, people, and my colleagues have commented, people and have said themselves, it's hard to understand this FAR thing, and this will give time for more understanding on that. I also think it's really unwise to do anything until we know the effects of SB 9. So I agree with the 1, 2, 3 of Commissioner Reed and seconded by Commissioner Wiscombe. I've always felt very uncomfortable about FARs because it seems to me in Santa Barbara, we have such an incredible architectural heritage, and it's such a part of what Santa Barbara is to us and to the rest of the world. And going to FARs, well, that slide 10 was kind of a good representation. The building is maximizing the mass that goes straight up and lose all of the charm and the variation that we have in Santa Barbara. And it could even, going this direction, especially, the tier 3 is totally unacceptable. It will create massive boxes that in the EPV will be decorated in Spanish style on the outside, but will totally change the character of Santa Barbara downtown. Since my little analysis was discussed, it was mentioned by Commissioner Higgins, perhaps for the public I should explain what that is. And this was, my analysis was deemed as correct by Jessica Metzger. When you have new housing in the community, that means new people move to the community. Those new people have needs, and they create the need for more jobs, which creates the need for more housing for the people who fit those jobs. And there's no way that the Kaiser Marston study, which was the study that gave the city the basis for implementing an inclusionary ordinance by showing that there was an impact. The new residents create this impact for more services, more jobs, more people, and most of those jobs are lower income, so it's more lower cost housing. There is no way that we're going to in any way make any progress unless it's 20%, according to the Kaiser Marston study, where it would circle out. That's what it would take to balance it. But we're already way out of balance. And it's going to make the jobs going this way, as proposed, will make housing imbalance worse. And, we could be facing even higher RHNA numbers because the RHNA numbers are based on the jobs imbalance. There was a presentation made by Stefanos Polizoides, who's a noted planner, urban planner, initiator of the new urbanism earlier this year, and he said he's passionate about Santa Barbara. He lives in Pasadena and has visited here literally hundreds of times. And he walks around looking at the architecture. And what he said was, he described FARs as a very disturbing and destructive way of making cities, in part because a building's massing is not determined in the context of its surroundings. And he spoke of how, quote, how magnificent the fabric of the city is, how really extraordinary it is, and how mixed and varied it is, which might be one of the reasons people love it so much and visit so much, because it looks unusual, and it is unusual, because it has old buildings and new buildings and big buildings and small buildings, and the buildings talk to each other. Under the FARs, the buildings do not talk to one another, and you get a wall of construction, and we lose what's so precious to us all here in Santa Barbara. So I think, and the AUD program has created hundreds of units, rental units, which we hadn't had any for years. Brian Johnson, the president of the Board of Realtors, reported in the spring that the vacancy rate in Santa Barbara had gone up to 4.4%. And when it had been around 0.5% for years. And he credited the AUD program. He said rents have gone down a little too. So I would prefer to stick with the AUD program. I think it's working. It's creating some of the housing we need. And I think we've got to get behind the state. And I heard President Biden's big infrastructure, social programs, plan, budget items have significant amounts of money for HUD to subsidize the only really affordable housing that we'll get when it's through something like an agency like the Housing Authority. So those are my thoughts on all of this. And
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Which of my colleagues would like to go next in providing comments? Commissioner Bonderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd be happy to go next. It's always very hard to go after Commissioner Lodge. I really respect her opinion and her background on all of this, and it leaves me with a lot to think about. Before she spoke, I already felt that I wouldn't be able to provide the answers to the questions that have been asked of us today. I don't feel like we have enough information to provide comment appropriately. And I understand that others before me have said just flat out no. I don't want to say no, but I'm not ready to say yes. I feel like we need to have more accurate data from the community in order for the consultant to be able to put together the most accurate, most appropriate information into this report. Starting with the obvious, the fact that the tier 3 rental numbers were simply not accurate. They don't reflect our community. And of course, Santa Barbara is very significantly different than other communities within California. It's just its own type of city. It looks different. It costs differently. And I think that it's very important that they continue to pull together the data that they need. And today was very encouraging. We can see that much progress has been made, but I don't think that it was quite ready to be demonstrated to us because it only left us with more questions. So I would just simply say that more data needs to be pulled together. I hope that today's experience has shown the team of consultants and our staff who's working together with them that they already know there's so much more that needs to be pulled together before we can really start understanding and working forward. So I would just say, continue to look at the cost of living. Please pay close attention to our historical structures and the importance of our historical center. Also, that is it with in relationship to the historical areas in downtown, but also neighborhood context, those edge relationships. There's a lot that needs to be considered, and I'm fully aware. I heard Ms. Metzger say that they are fully aware. They're working on this. So it's clear to me that this is just a work in progress. I'm not reprimanding anyone. I just know that we're in the middle of the trenches here, and sometimes it's not clear to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But as my fellow commissioners have mentioned, the height of the structures in our city in comparison to other cities, we're not looking at something that is easy to be, pulled from other previous projects that the consultants may have been working on. This is a very unique project that they're working on now. Their city is unique. Our expectations are unique. We have vacancies and opportunities for adaptive reuse. I was really pleased to hear that today. And also ownership is very important to our community. We spoke about it the last time. We continue to speak about it again. It's always very nice to hear that my fellow commissioners are advocating strongly for this, as I feel very strongly about it myself. I will say that theoretically, I understand FARs, and my personal instinct is to say that I appreciate FARs. I believe they will be better than AUDs, the AUD program, but I would really like it to start taking more shape and be more clear along that line of what we're envisioning it to be before we make comments or answer questions like these on the screen. I don't feel like it has done what it is supposed to do yet. We haven't reached a place where we're confident saying that we're on the right track quite yet. But instead of just giving you a no, I'd like to just say I'm really enthusiastic and hopeful to see where this process takes us and where the consultant report and all the hard work that the city staff members have put into this for a very long time now, where that comes into fruition and how we can start seeing it. I recognize that there's so many moving parts here, and I look forward to seeing what it can be, and when the presentation comes back to us again with more data and more very clear information that we can grasp and we can talk about. I'd like to end just by saying that I agree with the previous commissioners who spoke about public vetting. I think public educational opportunities, perhaps workshops, would be very supportive in this case, because without public support, this effort is not going to go where we want it to go. And as we've seen in the past, a lot of time when there isn't support on something, it can often be because of misunderstanding. When we misunderstand or we don't understand a challenging and complex topic as FARs, then we are likely just to say no. And I would hope very much that we as a commission, we as the city staff, as the team in place working so hard on this, wants to avoid as many big no's as possible. And by getting the public to be clear and understand, then they too can have a much better opportunity to make informed decisions and potentially support this project, this type of methodology moving forward. So I'll just end by saying I look forward to the next round. Very, very excited to see more. As Ms. Metzger mentioned herself, there's a lot of things in the works, like the neighborhood context, the edge conditions, some of the other topics that our fellow commissioners have brought up. And I'm also looking forward to hearing more about SB 9 and 10 and the program EIRs that Ms. Metzger referred to. I think there's a lot of very positive things coming forward. And I hope that my feedback has been useful, that it's not a big hard no, but just to say that I'm, it's not ready yet, but I'm really looking forward to what's going to come next. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonderson. Vice Chair Escobedo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to start by thanking staff. I'm always really impressed with our long-range planning staff. You've done a really great job to this point. I'd like to thank the consultant. I was impressed by this analysis. I'm going to start by just talking about FAR in general. I think FAR in general is better than the AUD program, just hands down. I think what FAR doesn't benefit from is it is very complex and it's not intuitive. And I think what I just don't know how to describe it, how to explain it. I'm sure staff struggles with the same thing, because I think intuitively you look at these FARs and you think, okay, one FAR here, two FAR here, and then we show examples of buildings that are one FAR. And when we say, okay, I know that that's an actual building in a built environment. And then we start talking about two FAR somewhere else, and people say, I can't imagine twice the size of this one FAR building, or this is a 1.5 FAR. I can't imagine 3 FAR, when that's not really how this works. It is so site specific. It's so dependent on the lot. It's so dependent on the constraints of that lot. And I think sometimes in these conversations, we try to get by with the minimum possible threshold so that we get some units in ideal conditions, but overall we don't get much beyond that. And the problem with that is that the ideal situations, they're fewer and fewer with every project that's built. Many of the projects that we've seen have been built on sites that were underutilized or ripe for development. Sites that we're going to have to produce housing on in the future are going to have operations that are currently going on. And we have to basically convince people to take the risk to cease operations so that we can get some housing. Now, one of my biggest interests is there are limited sites for development. When there are even fewer opportunities for nonprofit developers or housing developers who are building majority affordable projects, how do we maximize those projects? How do we take advantage of every single unit possible and make it as cheap as possible for them so that they are the most efficient with those few subsidized dollars that they have available to them through grant funding, through just revenue streams. How do we do that? And that's probably the biggest concern that I have with what we see today. I personally will be reluctant to support anything that doesn't have incentives. I know Commissioner Higgins said streamlining isn't his favorite word these days, and I totally agree. But how do we shorten that application process for truly affordable projects? How do we maximize the incentives for those truly affordable projects? How do we make as many decisions in that process ministerial versus them having to come to a commission or a board? That's what I want. In regards to these FARs, to be quite honest, I think they need to be higher. I think that we need to provide opportunities for these spaces to actually produce housing and try not to do what the bare minimum. We are in this position because we didn't build housing for decades. We are in this position because California in general decided to stop investing in public housing. And the solution is not to stop building housing and stop providing opportunities for housing. Yes, I know in the short term it's hard because we're not seeing the exact units that we want. But you know what? Let's create the environment, let's create the situation that if the funding is available, especially for affordable housing, that we maximize it. That there isn't this long year after year drag of changing development standards and changing process to get to a place where we can maximize that potential. Let's create that environment. And then when we're done in these meetings, we go and advocate for funding at the state and federal level, at the county level. And so I get a little bit frustrated in this conversation because it sounds like we're it sounds like sometimes we just want to find alternate reasons to not see housing. That we're happy with who's here and that's okay. I'm sure that there's a relationship between jobs or housing and producing the need for jobs. I have yet to see what the numbers of that ratio is. Is it 20 units to one job? What is it? Because to be honest, to me, it sounds like we're okay with lower income people driving into town from miles and miles away. That's an environmental impact that's not being taken into consideration in these discussions. And so I apologize for my frustration, but that's where I'm at in this conversation. And so when I look at this, are there any comments on the FAR map? Yeah, I think some of these FARs need to be higher. I think we need to look at the Haley corridor and I think that probably needs to be higher. Definitely in these edge conditions where it's really going to impact someone's house, but there's always going to be something that's going to be impacted. So it's just one of many considerations that we need to weigh as we're considering policy. The 20% added FAR accessible, is 20% enough? I could probably get convinced, yeah, it probably is. I'm interested with increased affordability and increased height by right. I'm interested in, if we have to, in places that can support more housing, that if we have to change the zoning in that area, then we investigate that. I do like the 20% affordable at the tier 3, but I want a tier 4 for affordable housing, and that would be more than 50% of a project. Increase in lieu fees on small projects and condos, yep. Support larger FARs for smaller lots. This gets to the point that I made earlier in that FAR is very specific, dependent on lot and lot constraints. And so, yes, I would be supportive of larger FARs or changes to the development standards dependent on certain lot constraints. I'm definitely interested in that. I'm interested, as I stated earlier, of requiring the calculation of not just gross FAR, but livable FAR, so that we know how much of that space is being dedicated to livable area and units, and where possible, we disincentivize the amenities. I think we don't halt this process and wait for SB9. There's been an analysis that SB9, the effects of it is going to be negligible. That the amount of sites where people are going to take advantage of SB9, there's not many. And I think there's a little bit of fear mongering around SB9. So we may not have the political will to push this forward, but I'm definitely going to be one of the people that is going to be in support of moving to an FAR system and trying to maximize the number of units that we get out of the rare opportunities that we really see for development. So again, I thank staff. I also apologize to staff for my poorly worded questions. I'll get a little bit better at that as we go on, I'm sure. But appreciate you all, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Escobedo. Has everybody commented? Anybody want to express any follow-on comment before I do? Commissioner Lodge, did you want to say something else before I comment?
A couple of quick comments. I've always been supportive of the Housing Authority and its 100% affordable projects. The city figured out a way, this is even before AUD, to allow for El Carrillo to be built. It's 122 micro units to the acre. And it's really amazing how people the residents make those little tiny units, 256 square feet, their own. The Kaiser Marston report says for every 100 market rate units, there is a demand created for another 20. That's why it needs to be 20%, and another 20 low, and it's not just moderate income, it's very low, low, and moderate income housing units. We can't just build housing to build housing. It needs to be the kind we need. And going with these higher FARs is definitely not going to bring us that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lodge. Okay, I'll go to my comments and then we'll start to wrap up this item. I want to step back from the numbers for a moment and to start actually where Commissioner Lodge left off. I think that what's critically important for the city decision makers is to look very realistically, very candidly at intentions and commitment regarding housing and defining housing and for who struggle to afford housing of a variety of types. Because those who have significant financial means have no struggle in either owning or renting in the Santa Barbara area. When I think of the Housing Authority, I just want to make one comment about the Housing Authority in this regard. The Housing Authority told me that prior to the 2008 recession, if I'm recalling this feedback correctly, the Housing Authority was not charged entitlement or permitting fees, planning fees by our city. No fees. Whether or not you agree with that or not, the point to that is that prior to 2008, the cost of the Housing Authority's housing applications, and that all the way passed down to the individual unit rental fees, the monthly fees, was significantly lower because our city didn't charge the nonprofit housing developer fees at all, let alone the same fee schedule as a full market rate housing applicant. And I don't think this is just anecdotal, because I actually asked Rob Fredericks to provide me the documentation of the fees charged by our planning department. And I compared that to the fees charged of the Onatega project, full market rate on the corner of Ortega and Anacapa. So I bring this up because it goes to real conviction on our part. We call it political conviction, public policy conviction. What are we really committed to doing? Because then we have to look at our practices relative to our genuine interests and commitments. Okay, so now I come back to today's item. I think part of the challenge for me, and I'm hearing this from members of the public, and even just trying to understand what we're doing with these analyses and in these hearings, is that some of the terms, such as floor area ratio, and some of these numbers, if we look on our screen on slide 40, 20%, 15%, and FAR of this number, that number, a higher number. The numbers themselves, unless you're really technically adept, which I'm not a developer, I'm not an architect myself, or an engineer in this field, is very difficult to comprehend in terms of tying it to our intentions, our interests, our needs in the type of housing we want to develop, and wherever we want to develop it in the city, or not develop it for that matter. So I'm still struggling myself with the relationship between these methodologies and the percentages, the numbers that we've been tackling or incorporating into the discussions, because I'm not sure that that's the correct starting point. And I'm not saying we're just starting today, so I want to be clear about that. I personally would have preferred not to undertake this economic development study. I may have even expressed myself the lack of support for this when it first came to Planning Commission, before it went to Council, and the Council directed staff to hire the consultants, and the consultants did the job I think that they were retained to do. But the starting point is off for me. The starting point should be, as I was inquiring of, what kind of incentive structure or program outline should we consider to say we want to incent X, and let's just say it's adaptive reuse. I mean, I said adaptive reuse in workforce, and we can define however we define workforce. I mean, recently I've been talking about it, our police officers, our firefighters, our teachers, our healthcare workers, first responders broadly defined. If we start there, and then we start to ask questions about what kinds of policies and incentive programs do we need to encourage that, and we work our way down to the mapping of it, where in our city can we accommodate this type of housing with more units for this type of workforce, or the diverse workforce I just mentioned. Where is it most likely to be placed or physically, geographically situated that would make most sense for the workforce? And you see where I'm going with this. As we would work our way through this kind of logical progression and strategic progression, then I think we could come to a place where we say, now given all of that we've worked through, what are the financial constraints or needs? And how do we talk with the building community, the investor building community, both on the for-profit and nonprofit side, to say, what do you need to tell us to make this happen? What are we missing? And I think part of that discussion needs to include public forums, as some of my colleagues have mentioned. Now, as we come out of the pandemic, I truly hope, starting next year, let's say, that the kind of open house, I think Ms. Metzger had called it back with the AUD. Gosh, Ms. Metzger, I've lost track of exactly when you held those open houses, you and Mr. Gullett, and probably Ms. Deisty as well, at the Faulkner Gallery. I think we need to provide the public with those in-person open house opportunities with information that is understandable to the average resident, the average community member. When I say average, all I mean by that is they don't have the technical savvy that a specialist would have, not even a planning commissioner, but somebody whose profession is doing this day in and day out, because the language is different. And I don't know if we're going there. I don't know if we're on the right path in that regard. Now, the timing of this. No, I want to step back and say one other thing. I want us to talk about the AUD program, because Commissioner Lodge and I, as you know, were members of the Planning Commission that put forward a different version of the AUD program, not the one the council actually enacted in 2013, but nonetheless a version of a new multi-unit housing program that hadn't been seen. And after 40 years of not building any new rental housing, something had to move forward. The community was urging the Planning Commission to take a step, take a risk. It won't be perfect because no policy is, no program is. That's not the point. We're not striving for perfection. We have to incrementally move forward to move the community forward and try out some policies and programs to move us in a direction where we think we're contributing to community needs. We're achieving some missed community needs, some absent community needs, certainly in the area of housing. We do have some new moving pieces that staff is considering, and we had that slides, I think 41 and 42 from Ms. Metzger, that do need to be incorporated into, I think, the follow-on hearing on November 4th. There will always be new legislation coming from Sacramento. I think it's just a given for the remainder of the terms for all of our planning commissioners and probably elected officials. So I'm not one to think that we need to pull back or delay because of, for example, analysis of specifically Senate Bill 9. I think I've read it, and I've read 10 and I've read 8, and I know the staff is analyzing Senate Bill 9. Had an exchange with Ms. Brooke about this. They're looking at all the parcels in the city to see where the 3 exemptions and the 2 limitations that are part of that legislation will qualify or disqualify parcels. So staff is on it, and also starting to look at crafting a companion ordinance to that analysis. To extend the AUD program without a robust discussion, I don't know when it's going to be, in January with the new mayor and council seated, let's say, I don't see it as kicking the can down the road. I know that expression's been used. But at some point, I do think we need to draw a line in the sand and say, we have to take some risks, some measured risks, in making some changes to our multi-unit housing program and policy, and closely evaluate, are we getting housing applications in that we thought we could be incenting, we wanted to incent? And at some point we say, okay, we have the next one in, we have 2 in. Let's see how that plays out, not to cut off new housing applications, but this concept of continuous evaluation and ordinance revision has really not been taken up by our city leadership since the AUD was adopted. And I don't mean to be overly harsh, but Commissioner Lodge, you'll remember this. The Planning Commission also gave the 2011 Mayor and Council a tool called the Adaptive Management Program. This tool was to be used in a way that continuously evaluated the AUD program, and through continuous improvement, just like anything in life or in government, should have been helpful to the mayors and councils in saying, we need to tweak it here, we need to revise it there, and we'd better do it in a timely way, because otherwise all this time will have gone on, these years, and what will we have to show for it when we all say we need additional housing, whether or not we all agree on all the particulars. So staff, I hope you're not terribly disappointed. I'm very hard pressed with any specifics to answer all of these bullet point questions for you on slide 40 for all the reasons that I've mentioned. I would rather you take up the comments of my colleagues, maybe some of what I've said, and fold it into the work you're continuing to do to prepare for November 4th. I hope that we'll be able to have some more concrete discussions and provide you some helpful direction back to council. I think I'll leave it there for now. Now I want to say one more thing. And that's the relationship between our city and Sacramento, because it's probably in just about every hearing that I hear comments, and from the community in general, the frustration with Sacramento and all the new legislation that continues to come forward, with each legislative session. Rather than hoping that Sacramento lets up on the accelerator, hoping that if we just provide a few more housing units, state legislators will maybe give us some relief. I don't see that happening. I don't think that's realistic. And so I'm asking myself, and I've discussed this with Mr. Gullett time and again, instead of worrying about Sacramento, which I don't think is a great use of our time or public resource, quite frankly, let's ask ourselves how to do what we do best, which is balance new policy or revised policy with the sensitive, beautiful city that we have, because we all love Santa Barbara and nobody here is looking to ruin Santa Barbara. Absolutely. So I think we should focus on the authority we have, the tools we have, and not waste time wringing our hands over what we can't control, and double down on what we can control and be as innovative and collaborative as possible, but also bringing the community in. So that's where I'll leave it. And I'll ask my colleagues if there's anything else. Otherwise, staff, could you come back on? And if there's anything you'd like to say to us as we close out this item, looking ahead to November 4th. Mr. Busk or Mr. Gullett or Ms. Metzger.
Thank you, Chair Schwartz, for everyone's comments from the commission. We'll definitely be taking them into consideration going forward.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Gullett. So with that closes this item. Let's just look to our final administrative agenda. And to my colleagues, do we have any committee or liaison reports? Ms. Bonderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I have a few reports to share. I will start with the Architecture Board of Review. We have 3 projects I'd like to share. The first one was seen on September 20th. It was a new item and it was a pre-application review. So pre-application reviews are one-time kind of consultations, and they don't end with a final appealable decision. So none was made on this item. But what that does mean is that the BAR members each provide several very thorough comments to give guidance on the project that's being seen. So the project was for at 201 East Haley Street, and it was for a project that consists of constructing a 4-story, 48-unit mixed use, and it comprises of 8 studio units, 32 one-bedroom units, 8 two-bedroom units, and approximately 6,632 square feet of commercial retail space at the ground level, which is going to be, well, it's designed, it's intended to serve 5 to 7 businesses. So I thought this was interesting enough to share with you all. This was a project that clearly just got some feedback, and it'll go back to the drawing board. If anyone's interested, I would recommend that you take a peek at it, but it may come back looking different after the comments are applied. I would just also give you a little bit more information about it. The residential units range in size, with an average unit size of 587 square feet. The proposed development would be 78 dwelling units per acre, and it would have several amenities like a rooftop gym and rooftop pool, a gym, other amenities, as well as 63 vehicle parking spaces and 52 bicycle parking spaces. So we haven't seen a project of this caliber before, from my knowledge, at least since I've been involved. But I did want to bring it to your attention, because if it does move forward, and it moves forward in this format, it will come to Planning Commission. So I'm introducing it to you now, and we may see it in the future as described or different based on the comments that they've received. The second project and the third project were both seen on October 4th. The first one is at 3888 State Street. It was for project design approval and final approval. And it was for permitting an outdoor dining deck that was allowed temporarily under the Emergency Economic Recovery Ordinance. Of course, this is for the COVID-19 economic recovery types of projects that we see that support outdoor dining and other types of projects on State Street to keep those types of businesses going. So this project received front setback zoning modification by staff. The staff hearing officer just 2 weeks ago on September 22nd. Perhaps Commissioner Higgins is going to bring that up, but I just wanted to mention I like to share those kinds of projects with you when they happen, because they go hand in hand with what we're trying to accomplish in downtown on State Street to help with our businesses to stay healthy and move ahead with their business. The last project I have today is a conceptual review for 37 West Calle Laurales, and it is a proposal to permit 2 as-built residential units and convert 2 existing commercial suites into 2 new residential units. That'll total out to 4 residential units in this location, with 11 uncovered and 6 covered existing parking spaces on the site. It also includes commercial and residential bike parking, and the review and approval of the zoning modification by the staff hearing officer is required to reduce and alter the open yard requirement. So again, this is a project that did not have any appealable decisions made at the hearing because it's still in conceptual review, and it requires to go to show before it comes back again and gets approval. That concludes the ABR report. I also have 2 quick notes.
Bonderson, what's in that building now? I want to visualize where that is on Calle Laurales.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it is on the behind the CVS structure there. There are, if I remember correctly, I looked at this a few weeks earlier. God, I guess it was last week, but it seems like a blur. And
Okay,
if I remember
that's fine.
correctly,
I was just trying to
these were all
picture.
office buildings prior and other types of kind of suites. And it could look like an apartment and could look like an office space. And that's why it has so much parking. Don't quote me on that, but again, it's at 37 West Calle Laurales. So hopefully
Okay.
If you're interested, I can send you more information.
That's okay. I just was looking to envision it. So back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So since we saw each other last on September 22nd, the State Street Advisory Committee met again for the second time, but for the first time under our new and permanent leadership. We had Tess Harris, who is the newly hired State Street Master Planner, who is our staff leader, our facilitator for these meetings. And the meeting is now online if anyone's interested in watching it. It was a quite productive meeting where she presented a lot of information, and we had Ms. Ostringer also present information about the Brown Act and about how these types of meetings should be conducted. And then Ms. Harris allowed us the opportunity to comment and provide our point of view on several different items, sort of as a brainstorming session and to get everyone warmed up about what this committee is going to be all about. So we're getting started. It's been very, very, lots going on at these meetings. Definitely worth following if you're interested in any way. And the last, and I should say the next meeting has currently been scheduled for a Monday. That's October 18th from 4 to 6. So if anyone's interested, they can tune in live. They do take public comment, just in the same format as Planning Commission. So if anyone is interested to speak, please send in letters or call in live for comments. Lastly, Transportation and Circulation Committee, the TCC, is having a meeting at the end of this month. We haven't had a meeting recently, so this is well awaited. It will be on Thursday, October 28th at 5 p.m. They usually run about 90 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer, about maybe 2 hours at the most. So if anyone's interested, tune on in. That's coming up. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonderson. Commissioner Higgins, reports for us from the field.
Sure, Madam Chair. I'm glad Commissioner Bonderson mentioned the State Street Committee and that we have captured Tess Harris from the county. Bad for Director Plowman at the county, good for Renee, Ms. Brooke. At the city, we have acquired fantastic talent in the planning department. So looking forward to hearing more about that. Anyway, we've had 2 hearings, show hearings since our last PC hearing, and they've comprised, the items have been uniformly front yard setback modifications or yard area modifications of 1 ADU in the coastal zone. And in fact, the item that Ms. Bonderson mentioned was a front yard modification, I think, for Chuck Steakhouse. So yay for more flexibility for those that go to Chuck's in District 4 and 5.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any other committee or liaison reports? Commissioner Lodge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Bolton, if you could bring up the image of 2626 Morton Road. Here we go. You remember not too long ago, I reported on the conversion of the Staples building into a gym, and they wanted to install a climbing wall, and a very high climbing wall, and the roof needed raising anyway, so it had to go to the HLC. Well, this is somewhat the Single Family Design Review Board project that will be coming to the Planning Commission, and it's a single family home where they are building what was described as a climbing wall, but it's really a climbing tower. It has 3 sides, and it's that tower on the right. The board had a little bit of problem with it architecturally, but they, as I said, it will be coming to the Planning Commission for a modification for more than 750 square feet of covered parking, proposing 2 garages, and and a coastal development permit. So that's my report. Thank you.
Interesting, Commissioner Lodge. Thank you. Any other reports? I'm sorry, Commissioner Lodge, what was that?
Pictures seem to help.
Okay, I was wondering if you're going to sign up for that climbing wall, but I'm not sure that's going to be available. Like the new commissioner site visit. I mean, I won't be volunteering myself. I was just wondering if you were. Okay, any other liaison or committee reports today? All right, going once, going twice. I don't see anybody else coming online, so it's 4:36. And with that, our hearing is adjourned for today. Thank you all very much. Oh, wait, Commissioner Higgins. Okay.
No, I was just waving goodbye to everybody.
Oh, yes, so long, farewell. Yes.
Until we meet again.
Yes, and where is okay, yes, we'll say, and be well. We still have lots of work to do this calendar year, and so it requires us all working together and being patient and thoughtful, and so we're doing that. Thanks, everyone. Good to see you all. Be well.